I'm Alfred Lamont Weber, and we're very privileged today to be with Sheldon Moore, the author of Remember Zen. And you may recall the series that we've done with Sheldon on the process of individual ascension or enlightenment, which Sheldon will be explaining in this webinar. And we're bringing it up now as we're approaching an unusual period, a triad starting in January of 2018 of lunar eclipses in enlightenment coming up. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sheldon to really take us through this multi-dimensional and important journey about reaching our own individual enlightenment in our individual incarnations on the planet. Thank you, Sheldon.
Thanks, Alfred, for having me again. Before we kind of get into the presentation, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, there's a lot of memes on the internet right now, and I've been sort of watching this stuff for about 30 years now, probably long before a lot of people even kind of started getting into. I know a lot of people label it the New Age. To me, it's just Dharma teachings. But what I've seen is a lot of false memes get put onto the internet, where, I'll give you an example. There was one back in 2009, and we were just talking about earlier, called Jupiter Ignition. And I saw so many people actually believe this, and it was going to be part of ascension. It was going to turn into another star, and our planet was going to have all this upliftment. And it was the first time I really saw how that could potentially affect people. And how it really affects us is it pulls us down when these things don't occur. And so we have this spiritual community kind of coming in, and they're hungry for real teachings and real truth. And they start getting caught up in all these memes that are out there for them to feed on. And a lot of them aren't true. They never occur. And then you sort of get this cyclic up and down within the spiritual community. And it really creates despair. And, you know, a lot of people are now calling it hopium is the new word for, you know, a lot of this fluff that's getting peddled on the internet. But I wanted to talk a little bit about hope before we get into the presentation. And this is a famous quote from Buddha when he said, "We are what we think. All that arises is within our thoughts, and we create the world with our thoughts." And so the power of collective thought is very, very strong. And so our thoughts always have to be hopeful. Hope rises. Whether you want to call it hopium, don't fall for that trap. You know, if it's something you're being told is not true, you have the right to be angry. You have the right to feel that way, but, you know, get focused back down onto the core things, which is individual enlightenment. It doesn't matter if you want to call it ascension, awakening, enlightenment. That's what our right as spiritual beings is. Everybody has the right to attain enlightenment, but it takes time to achieve that. There's techniques. And I'm going to share a hidden teaching that's been kind of missing on the surface of this planet for 2,500 years. We've talked about this before, but I want to go through it one more time just to kind of drive home the points that you can take the evolution of consciousness into your own hands, and you can take these steps. You may find a guru, you may not, but you can at least start taking the right steps and stop getting caught up in all of this spiritual fluff and a lot of this channeling stuff that's happening that's really not very accurate a lot of the time. So remember that hope does rise, and you don't really need to be sort of caught up in the world affairs on the path to enlightenment. If you're still getting caught up in all this stuff all the time when it doesn't occur and you're getting angry from it, you're keeping yourself from the path of enlightenment. And I think some of this these means are by design. They're doing this to do exactly this. So you just get tired of it and you actually kind of stop your spiritual journey. And I've seen a lot of people do that, and you don't have to go that far. It's just don't get caught up in it anymore. Like, use discernment. That's a word that's obviously often thrown around, but you got to start using real discernment and you'll know in your heart when this stuff's true now. I think we're all learning a little bit. So it was a bit of a learning curve for people too. So just remember that collective thoughts multiply. And when our thoughts are hopeful, we're all co-creators. We co-create with our thoughts. That's what Buddha was saying in that statement. So when our thoughts are high and we have hope for a better future, we'll eventually create it. So don't get caught up in all of the things that the Illuminati are doing and worrying about all of these dark things, because you'll get pulled down, and that's kind of by design. Don't get caught up in that stuff. You got to live in the world as the world is, and you've got to find enlightenment in a world as the world is. So the reason we're doing this a week before these triads is, in my discovery, I realized that the multiverse plays a very significant role in the evolution of human consciousness. And we talked about these binary star systems. 70% of all the suns in the universe are binary. Binary stars help the evolution of consciousness. And everybody knows about astronomy and astrology, that the position of planets and the position of stars can affect who you are at a very subtle level. You still have a soul that's very powerful that can go beyond where you're born in a particular spot of space and the astrology behind that. But there's also things that occur much closer that also affect consciousness. And the ancients knew this, and I'll show you throughout this presentation how the ancients knew this. And it's littered throughout our past, and we've lost this information. And we lost it, just like Shri Yukteswar said, we lost the real length of the Yuga cycle in the Dark Age. Our calendars got mixed up in the Dark Age. We lost a lot of our ancient teachings from Atlantis and from previous root races in the Dark Age. Dark Ages are tough times, and we lose a lot of things in the Dark Age. And we're just coming out of a Dark Age. Some people think we're in it for a lot longer, but we've come out of it. We're on the ascending arc, which I'll explain later. And so now's the time that the magnetics of our solar system or binary solar system and the magnetics of these eclipses are getting more powerful, and they'll continue to get more powerful as these two, our sun and the binary, come back together. And so we've basically entered the stream of the golden age. We're not into the proper golden age, but we've entered the stream. So back when in the 2014-15 tetrads, I know a lot of people got on the internet about that, and they were ascension dates, they were doom dates, and everything else but what they really are. And what they really are is their times for enlightenment. Shakyamuni Buddha said all people attain enlightenment at night. He attained enlightenment on a full moon night during a lunar eclipse. That's not documented, but I'll explain how I know that. And one of his earliest teachings, the Kalachakra Tantra, actually has that within it. And there's a reason for it. And I'll explain them all as we go through this presentation. But these upcoming eclipses, a lot of people miss the opportunity of the tetrads. You see, Alfred, we come out of the Dwapara Yuga, the Sandus period of Dwapara Yuga. We go into full Dwapara Yuga. So virtue jumps from 25 to 50%. And then bang, we get 4 tetrads. And now bang, we get 3 triads right after the Jupiter moved through the belly of Virgo, and everybody, that's the rebirth in the heavens. A lot of this stuff was played out in the heavens, and we missed that as well. So these triads coming up are best opportunities for anybody watching this series to go out and do your spiritual practices. It doesn't mean that you're going to be enlightened on the next one, but that's when you want to do all your spiritual practices, and someday there's a good chance that you will be. See, if you were a Kriya Yoga practitioner, or you're practicing some kind of Buddhist technique in the past, you could be almost ready for enlightenment. You could have done 10, 20 years of practice and still nothing happens because you don't know about the effects of timing and technique. You've perfected the technique, but you don't know this little thing about timing that was lost in the dark age. And so this is very important teaching. I don't think I really drove that point home in the first series, how important this is. It can literally take decades or lifetimes off your individual path to enlightenment. So these triads are important. So the first one coming up next week can be seen really well in South America, Africa, Europe, and a little bit of part of Western North America. So Alfred, you'll be able to see it in Vancouver, not for as long a duration, but you'll probably still get the effects. So the real good one is for North America and South America is in January 2019. So just remember these dates, and whatever spiritual practice you have, remember what's being taught in this presentation. And these dates, and if you miss all these 3 dates, lunar eclipses always occur. They're not going to stop tomorrow. I believe they're going to get stronger as we progress along this ascending arc of the Kali Yuga. So this is important information to know. So you wanted me to talk a little bit about in this series, a little bit more about enlightenment and the actual position of the soul within the body during enlightenment. So I thought we'll just quickly look at what some of the masters taught about the path to enlightenment in the past. And these are very important teachings. And I thought Buddha's was the most important in a way. And he taught that the only way to end cyclic existence, that's the rebirth, the reincarnation cycle here on earth, was to attain enlightenment. And then you can enter peri-nirvana and go back to the creator or back to the source or whatever you want to call it. Go back to emptiness in Buddhism. There's no real God in Buddhism, but there is if you understand the whole meaning behind emptiness and dependent origination. But a very important teaching. So if you want to put this in sort of an exopolitical sort of modern statement, he's basically saying you can't leave this dimension, the third dimension, and go on your soul journey to a higher dimension unless you attain enlightenment. Now, I know a lot of people are saying this is a prison planet. Personally, I don't believe it is. I believe that your soul matches the vibration of the planet you're on. So you're meant to be there. And some higher souls might have agreed to come to this planet to help other people awaken. Some higher souls may have just can't come here just to learn soul growth. And a planet like this teaches a lot of spiritual lessons. Even though they're pretty rough at times, you can gain a lot of spiritual lessons on this planet. So Buddha is basically saying you do not go on in your spiritual journey until you attain enlightenment on earth. This is very important because all of this fluff about galactics are coming to save us and they're going to evacuate us or they're going to give us bags of cash or they're going to do this or they're going to do that. If I was anybody listening to this, I'd focus more on what these ancient masters said, and that you actually have to still attain enlightenment on planet Earth to continue on in your journey. And you might continue on this planet. We're on the ascending arc now. It's not going to be dark forever. It just isn't. It's going to get better. And that's not hopium. That's just part of Yuga cycles. That's just part of spiritual evolution. And you know, in some planetary systems, they may have totally destroyed the planet and every living thing on it. Another global form, those souls will incarnate. It still goes on. It's a terrible shame, but things can still go on. We just don't need to do that on this planet. And we have elements that want to go that direction, but we have to make sure that our focus is on attaining enlightenment, and then we can help others attain enlightenment, and the consciousness on this planet can lift. That's part of it. And Jesus said an interesting thing too. He said, no one can enter the kingdom of heaven unless he's born again of water and spirit. So what does that really mean? He's basically saying that, you know, baptism is in the water, holy baptism is not enough. You have to be born again in spirit. And what does that really mean? It means you have to be born again. Your spirit has to rise up. Keep your spirits up. When he said that, he's talking about lifting your consciousness. He's talking about enlightenment. And if you don't believe he is, go to Matthew 6:22, and it says, therefore that I be single, the whole body shall be full of light. He's talking about non-duality. You know, the Hindus wear the dot, you know, you're seeing with one eye, you're not seeing things good and bad in the constant duality, which most people do in polarity consciousness. He's saying, let your eye be single and your whole body shall be full of light. So here we have Jesus talking about enlightenment, and that you can't go back to the kingdom of heaven unless you attain enlightenment. And when he said it only through me, at that particular point in time, he was the guru in that area, and it was true. Those people, to go back to the Father or back to Creator or Source, he was the path, just like Krishna was the path or Buddha was the path. So they all taught they pretty much the exact same thing. And this is out of the Upanishads, where Krishna said, when the desires of the heart cease and the mortal becomes immortal and obtains Brahma, that's when you become enlightened, and you end suffering in this world. Basically, you can go on to a higher world or someplace else after you attain enlightenment. So every religion on this planet is focused on this. And it's you know, religions often get in the way, but the core teachings are quite profound still to this day. So what is this historical meaning of enlightenment? Because it's kind of hard to just openly describe enlightenment to somebody. But it is a state of liberation that can be attained on earth. That all the masters have taught us that. And this is right out of the Bhagavad Gita. This is Krishna's statement. One who has inner happiness, inner joy, and has found inner light, such a person, a yogi, has attained nirvana of Brahma. So he's attained enlightenment of God consciousness, Christ consciousness. He is one with the Supreme and attains the Supreme. Straight out of the Bhagavad Gita. That's probably the best description of enlightenment I could find. My personal way to describe it would be just perpetual bliss. You can still get angry. You can still stub your toe and swear and cuss. Your dog still can get you angry, whatever. But the bliss is just perpetual. And you know, everybody should experience that bliss. It's not a carrot being waved in front of you. You know, here's the bliss. You know, send some money or PayPal me. It should be free as well. And the path should have as much. You know, there's too much obstruction on our paths right now because we're getting hit with all of this spiritual fluff. And we really need to look back at what some of these great yogis taught us in the past, because it's more needed now than any time on planet Earth, I believe. So all sentient beings have the potential to awaken to this greater nature within. That's the God spark, your Buddha nature, your soul. It's where consciousness really resides. Consciousness is not in your head like we often think. When you die and have a near-death experience, which I have had, I left my body and I left my brain, but my consciousness was still there. The consciousness that's giving you this presentation, everything was still there. I just didn't have a body and a brain anymore, but the consciousness was still there. It was in my soul. So sometimes we think consciousness is in our brain, but it's really soul consciousness. That's really our driving force. Our brain just thinks it's in the driver's seat, but it really is the consciousness in the soul. And this inner life stream, I like what Tibetans call it, because they don't really want people to identify the soul or Buddha nature as something separate again. Otherwise you get caught up in that whole separate self thing. And they just call it a life stream. It's just a life stream. It doesn't remember all its names, all its faces, all its, what bike it had, it doesn't remember a lot of that. It gains soul lessons, spiritual lessons on its journey. So in this reincarnation process, a lot of that past life stuff it's not there anymore. And I think that might be for a reason. It's part of evolution, right? If you remembered everything, maybe evolution would come a lot slower. So there's many names, like some people call it the soul, the Buddha nature, Atman, which is the term the Vedics use, are just really terms to describe this inner light or God spark. And then Christ consciousness, moksha, nirvana, awakening, rigpa, which is the Tibetan word for enlightenment, bodhi, they're all terms to describe enlightenment, souls that have awakened. So we often get caught up in these terms, but they all really mean the same thing. So I wanted to kind of break down what are the paths to liberation? How does somebody awaken to their own nature? And it used to take a lot of work. You look at Buddha's life; he followed an extreme path, right? It can take a long time, but if you know some of the esoteric things that I'm teaching here today, it can take decades or lifetimes off the path to liberation. That's the only reason I'm doing this. I probably wouldn't even bother doing this if I didn't believe it was going to help other sentient beings awaken sooner. And so the first path is the path of karma, the way of works. So there is sects within Vedic tradition that just performed right actions, and they conformed with a higher law of dharma. And that alone was enough to eventually reach a state of enlightenment. And there's actually cases in history where people have followed just that path and have become enlightened. So what you do really does matter in life. That's why you should try to live a virtuous life, tell the truth, do all the things that are in the Eightfold Path, live that way, or live by the 10 Commandments. These things are important. These because it affects the soul. So that if you're here doing terrible things, you're just going to repeat those experiences, and your soul's not really growing. So the way it works is very important. Karma. The other one is jhana. I might pronounce that wrong. Some of my Vedic things are pronounced wrong, so excuse me, but that's the actual path to enlightenment. And reality or knowledge can be gained through this. And in the Vedic system, they have a whole system of meditation and exercises, yoga basically, to find liberation that way. And that's where most people, you should be meditating, you should be on doing some type of practice to learn to slow the mind down and really reveal your Buddha nature within. And it's very important to remember that whatever meditation you're doing, meditation should remove the obstacles of the mind and the body. So all that's revealed is the Buddha nature. So if your meditation's not doing that, you're probably doing the wrong type of meditation. And there's a lot of skeletal meditations out there, and there's a lot of these people that are kind of selling the light version of Dharma, not really giving effective meditation. So the type of meditations are quite important, and the fact that you're actually doing them is quite important. And the last one, Bhakti, that's the path of love and worship. And that's where you have total love and devotion to a deity like a Vishnu, or like Krishna or Radha, because they also use women as deities. Shiva. You could also use Jesus, could be your deity. That where you and also constant awareness of God and the love of God. And there are a lot of documented cases of people attaining enlightenment through that path. And I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but the Bahula, the founder of the Baha'i sects, he said that you should do the last two, incorporate both of them. And I really think you should try to incorporate all three of them in your life. And your path to enlightenment is going to be a lot simpler. And it's not that hard to do a lot of this stuff. And there's another form that is called Shaktipat, and that's really where a master can transfer the spiritual energy, the guru, into an old student that they might recognize in a past life or something like that. You don't see a lot of cases of that, and I think it's better to earn that on your own merit and your own effort rather than having that as an act of grace. But sometimes that transfer has happened, so there is other ways to attain enlightenment, but be real skeptical if somebody's going to charge you $5,000 for a Shaktipat enlightenment session or something like that, because it's probably a scam. And the other important thing about some of these past masters is they left really important clues about enlightenment. And Buddha followed a very extreme path, and he was almost at the point of death. And a full moon, it was on a full moon night, he attained full enlightenment. on a full moon night. So I want everybody to remember that, because that full moon night's there's an important teaching there. But there's another important teaching that Buddha left, and everybody misses this one, is that he reached a real low point. He was down. So his Buddha nature was low. It sunk. It was sinking. And that's kind of important in the technique that I'm going to teach you later, is that through Kriya Yoga or other types of meditation techniques, you got to be able to move your soul consciousness or your Buddha nature below the root chakra so it can flip and rise up. And that's the Kundalini rise, and whatever you want to call it, the diamond thunderbolt in Zen, where enlightenment is really sudden. But it's interesting that he reached a low point, and it was during a full moon. Like, everybody doesn't have to reach a low point during a lunar eclipse to attain enlightenment, but Buddha did. And so you can reach that low point just through a technique, rather than just reaching that low point through almost dying and giving up on life. And he later taught a middle way was more optimal. So he realized his extreme yogic path wasn't the way to enlightenment. He knew that. And that's where the whole middle way in Buddhism comes from, is that I was too extreme in my path to enlightenment. You don't have to go this hard. You can lighten it up a bit. And there was the sixth patriarch of Zen, probably the greatest Zen master that ever lived, Wei Neng. He attained enlightenment after hearing just a little short verse of a sutra, and he was only like 12 or 14 years old. But his father had died, and he had to haul wood all day, just a young kid doing man's work, basically. And I think that when he heard the sutra, he was completely exhausted. Again, his Buddha nature was low. And then in the more contemporary terms, I've never read any of his books, but I know he's helped with consciousness a lot, is Eckhart Tolle said that he reached a low point in his life, went to bed one night, again, at nighttime, wakes up the next morning full of bliss and enlightened. So it doesn't mean we all have to reach a low point. It means that the Buddha nature must get really low before it comes up. And that's a technique and the reason I'm sharing this is, if you understand the importance of the technique and the mechanics of enlightenment, you'll understand why it's important to do certain types of meditations, and why you'll understand why timing really has an important effect on your path to enlightenment. And Wei Neng also had a good important teaching, is that he said that the spirit of the Buddha nature within was already fundamentally pure. So we don't have to go through these ages of getting rid of your defilements and trying to purify your inner God spark, your Buddha nature, because it's already divine. It doesn't need all this excessive holiness and studying scriptures and rigid practice. And I think his teachings are well suited to the Western mind, and that's why my book is called Remember Zen. I think Zen is really a kind of a modified version of Zen, but Zen is really important for Westerners, because it removes a lot of the scriptural stuff, and a lot of Westerners aren't going to go sit on a plank for 20 years to become enlightened. They're just not going to do that, and they don't need to do that. And the most important Zen master said that you don't need to do that. And it was quite interesting. After the time of Wei Neng, the Buddhist school in the north separated into two schools, where one was very much study, monastic, being very spiritual and kind of religious, heavily religious, and this pure path of Wei Neng's that was very effective and was enlightening people. So you also asked me, you wanted to show me how this Buddha nature within us moves through the system, through the human body. And the body is it is 7 chakras and 7 bodies, and they're basically above your etheric body. They're not physical anymore. They're like light bodies. They're like the sheathing of the soul. And it's really this orb. If you see up here, this orb, they're appearing in digital photography. I know it's quite hard to talk about what a soul is, because this is God's creation, or the Creator's creation. but they do seem to be appearing in these orbs, in these digital photography. And I explained that in the first interview series, where these digital cameras are taking the pixelation of a picture, so it's not a full representation. Hey, stop it! Don't you do that. It's not a full representation. Sorry, I got dogs having a fight here. It's not a full representation, and of that. So they're appearing in these digital photography all the time now, and that's really it's a soul that's not in corporeal form. And corporeal form means basically without a body. So when you're in a body, you look like this. When you leave your body, it's just this multidimensional God fragment light source that seems to be round. And this is your Buddha nature. This is your soul. And when several months before a human's born, this light enters. It usually resides just below between the navel, just slightly above the navel, in between the last two chakras, and it just sits there. And it sits there. And if people don't believe that your soul's in there, if you ever been terrified, you put your hand over your chest, you're kind of protecting your soul. When you get hurt, lose a loved one or great pain in your life, it hurts in your heart chakra, right in the middle of your solar plexus. It doesn't hurt in your head, doesn't hurt in your hand. It's your soul weeping. It's your soul consciousness. That's where the soul is. And it must shift position all the way up to the crown chakra, to the top chakra at the top of your head for enlightenment to present. And you can do all kinds of yogic practice, bring that light up. Jesus saying, keep your spirits up. He was teaching some kind of form of Kriya Yoga to his disciple. It has to rise up. And you can use techniques where, if you're just sitting there right now, Alfred, you can say, I'm going to locate my consciousness at the bottom of my body, or at the bottom of my lower chakra. And you can kind of feel it moving around. It takes a time to get a hold of it and to move it, but you can position your consciousness, your soul, anywhere along the central nervous system. That's the amazing thing about, we have these amazing bodies, and these chakras can enter these orbs enter the body before birth, and they power up the whole chakra system. And each chakra is correlated with an organ, but the whole system, as soon as death occurs, the other 6 bodies will instantly collapse, and you're just left with the corpse. And this orb over here floats away and goes off on its journey, or waits for a while in the bardo, and takes corporeal form again, and comes back in and learns its lessons, and off it goes again. But it has to shift. It has to move. So how do you effectively move it permanently so that it does this? And this is the technique. I told you where it has to drop below and then go high. It has to do that and go to the top. And you see that it has polarity. This inner orb in all of us has polarity. It's affected by magnetics and electrics. And that's why in the Vedic Yuga cycle theory, how consciousness rises and falls with these cycles, this binary star system coming in. So we're affected by magnetics that way at a subtle level. We're also affected by magnetics, the position of the stars and the planets at a really subtle level. But when these solar eclipses come in, this Buddha nature is affected at a very local level, because you're talking about a star, our sun, the planet, and the moon all in a direct alignment. It's like, this is a solar eclipse. This is the sun, this is the earth, and they're in a direct alignment. They're charged plasma spheres. They greatly affect the magnetics and the electrics. And these are affecting these subtle bodies. So just because science can't prove that these subtle realms exist, they're just the same. And it's, I think Sri Yukteswar said that it was going to be Treta Yuga by the time our scientists catch up with some of this stuff. So he was actually saying it's a long time before our science catches up with it, because they can't measure it, they can't see it. But just because you can't measure it and can't see it doesn't mean it exists. And I think everybody knows that it exists. everybody knows there's something greater inside all of us. We all get that feeling. So it's very difficult to define a soul or the Buddha nature, but it's this inner light and it's in all sentient life. I really don't think there's people right now that don't have a soul on this planet. Some people think that that's the case. I'm not convinced about that. I think everybody has a soul. Some of our souls are at a very low level in the very beginner stage, and there's some advanced ones. We've kind of got the good, the bad, and the real ugly here. But it's like that probably throughout the multiverse. You get good, bad, and really bad. It's just the way things are in the multiverse. It's where pure consciousness resides. And you really don't know that for a fact until you have a near-death experience and you actually know you've left your body and your mind. So your consciousness is no longer in your mind or your body, but it's still there. And it's really where that pure consciousness is. It has everything in it, really. Your past life memories, all that stuff is in there. It's eternal. It goes on forever, and it can move in between the dimensions. So, Tibetans even see enlightenment as a different dimension or a different bardo. They call the dimensions bardos. And so when somebody's enlightened, they're actually seen as, even though they will operate in this dimension still, it's an expanded type of consciousness, and they actually see enlightenment itself as a different dimension. And when we die, we often go right into the bardo, and that's where we get kind of trapped and lost for a while, and we don't know how to move through that bardo and come back through the reincarnation cycle again, so we can attain enlightenment and eventually leave here altogether. And that's part of where I think some of this matrix and some of this archonic negative influence comes in. It's kind of there for a reason too. It helps with evolution of consciousness, believe it or not. It helps with soul growth, believe it or not. Even though it's terrible, it's kind of there. And I think on third dimensional worlds that it's always probably going to be there, especially like in a binary system. It comes in and leaves again. I think when we get into our next golden age, archons and negative influences, they're going to be gone, but they might come back again. I don't think so. I think they were going to hold the light this time, but that's what the Yuga cycles do. Is there's this constant dark age, golden age, dark age, and it's a cycle. It's the multiverse is a precision time clock of the Creator, designed for the evolution of consciousness. That's what it's for. So it's often stuck in this reincarnation cycle, and that's kind of where we're at. Some of us might need a few more lifetimes, and so we're not really stuck. Some of us could leave a lot sooner and go on in our journeys. Some of us might continue to incarnate in the golden age. I think we're going into a good time, so it's not, why would you want to leave, right? I think this is some of the best times on earth are coming up, and that's, again, not hopium. It's just the way the Yuga cycle works, and people are going to start becoming enlightened. These eclipses are getting more stronger, and there's more and more people just going to become enlightened. Some of them are already becoming enlightened, and I call them accidental enlightenment from past life, good merit, or whatever. They just wake up one day and they're enlightened. And that's going to happen more and more, but they necessarily don't have a teaching how to help other people enlighten. They may have elements of a teaching, but we still need complete teachings to get this on the show on the road, basically. More and more people have to get back to the basics, get away from all these internet memes and stuff, and just focus on the individual enlightenment again, because that's the most important thing you can do to help the upliftment of this planet is that, and be active in what's going on locally and stuff. Just don't sit at home and complain about this stuff. Actually try to help change it, because we all have that ability. And it's also affected by these Yuga cycles. So we'll explain that a little bit later. And another interesting one is there's documented scientific proof that magnetics and electrics affect human consciousness. And Albert Davies, he was a Canadian physicist, I think. He did all these experiments of putting people under positive magnetic fields and negative magnetic fields, and people reacted differently in each one of those two different scenarios. So, and I don't think it was really their mind reacting to it. I think it was the soul reacting to it. And so the soul really is affected by magnetics, whether they be long, far away magnetics from a planet or star clusters or constellations or position, or really close magnetics from a solar or lunar eclipse, or the magnetics of this Yuga cycle between these two stars. So Shri Yukteswar also had this, what he called the 5 aura electricities of the causal body. And like he said, it's not identified by modern science. Like he figured they weren't going to figure this out until Treta Yuga. And he said an atom under the influence of universal knowledge. And that's why so many of the teachings are based around increasing knowledge, developing the wisdom mind, is that these atoms will form a calm state. So as you start meditating, every atom in your body starts to form this calm state. And it can, when it's spiritualized, it's called buddhi. And when buddhi is magnetized, it has 2 poles. So when I showed you that earlier diagram of that orb rising up, it has polarity. And that these electricities are if they're under the influence of universal love, they actually produce this magnetic field. And that's why on the path to enlightenment, I think a loving heart is so important, is because all of this helps form this magnetized polarity of your soul. And this is not just Shri Yukteswar. He's pulling this out of Vedic research of himself, because he was a contemporary. I think he passed in 1936. He wasn't really that long ago. So a lot of this teaching is from the time of Krishna. It goes back a long time that they knew this stuff. But this is really important towards my teachings that I talk about later. And so when I started researching this, I found another anomaly that I thought was worth mentioning is, if you look at this top picture over here, where there's a picture of these orbs that are showing up in digital photography, they're showing up everywhere. Sometimes it's just droplets or dust or whatever, but when you see those really bright ones that look very 3-4 dimensional showing up in photography, they're more than likely a soul without a body, without corporeal form. So a soul without corporeal form is basically this. But if you look at that picture really closely, Alfred, you'll notice there's a pattern in there, and there's like a Dharma wheel. And all of these Dharma wheels are in ancient Buddhist, ancient India. They're even in the Indian flag. These Dharma wheels were seen in the past. This is stuff that goes back again 5,000-7,000 years. And so they were seeing them back then. Some spiritual people can actually see these things without having them getting captured in a digital photography. They actually can see them. And a neat thing about Buddhist teaching was the wheel of samsara, that we're on this reincarnation wheel. Well, this image that appears here, maybe this is the true image of the Creator. When they say we're like the multiverse is full of all kinds of sentient life forms. The humans aren't the only ones out there. So everything's not, our physical bodies probably aren't the image of the Creator. It's probably this image here. And in Kalachakra, I think they call it Kalagaya. They actually have a name for this image. And it appears in all this ancient artwork. And so this wheel of samsara is literally this wheel, because on this wheel, each one of these little dots you see here are many lifetimes. So all your lifetimes, all your soul conscious, all your spiritual, everything is somehow encoded. And I don't know how. I have no idea. I don't think it'll be a long time before we figure this out. But all your soul information is somehow encoded in some kind of liquid light, and we're getting a representation of it in digital photography, but it's far too complex to try to describe in this presentation, but we're seeing it. So another one of your viewers asked about the rainbow body. A lot of people are talking about the rainbow body. And one of your viewers asked that they left a question to me and asked me how they could achieve a rainbow body. I didn't want to tell them that most people who achieve rainbow bodies at the time of death. So didn't want to tell one of your viewers you got to die to get your rainbow body. Focus on enlightenment, And there's a good chance that when you pass, you will emanate a rainbow body. There's documented cases of rainbow bodies. And really what's happening is highly realized monks can radiate this rainbow light at the time of death. And really what it is when the physical body self-liberates into the non-material body. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing that, therefore, the eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light, the thing that Jesus said. At the time of death, what's happening with these masters is their physical bodies is getting liberated into the non-material body. And you're seeing these bright lights. You're seeing the light. You're seeing their light, their inner light actually happening. And in some rare occurrences, there's actually shrinkage occurs where they go in 5 days later after their guru dies and the body's shrunk to nothing. And that's not the only thing that occurs. Wei Ning, again, the sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism, he lived in 738 to 713 AD, Alfred. So he was almost 1,200 years ago. You see this guy up in the corner here with the red robe? He looks pretty good, doesn't he? That's Wei Ning. That's his physical body. He died sitting up. And what happens, the moment he died, he would have went straight into like a peri-nirvana, where his physical body was liberated into the non-material body. And so an instant kind of mummification takes place. So his whole body, his etheric body steps right out of his physical body. And that guy, or they put new robes on him all the time and stuff, that's his physical body. He's been sitting like that out in the rain somewhere in China for 1,200 years, and he still looks like that. So I wasn't there when he died, but I'll guarantee you there was probably rainbow body there when this man died. And that's why his body was preserved that way. He also wrote the Platform Sutra that defines enlightenment. So he was the only Chinese master that ever got his own sutra. So in the Buddhist works of literature of all time, he's got his own sutra. So he was a pretty profound teacher in all of Buddhism. So a lot of great teachers came after the Buddha. An interesting one was the Tibetan master Tsongkhapa. He was 1357 to 1419. He founded the Yellow Hat sect in Tibet, and he was the chief guru of the first Dalai Lama, Gendendrup, I think his name was, yeah. I don't know if I pronounced it right, but that was his name. So the first Dalai Lama, this was his guru, very important Buddhist reformer. And they say that he withheld his enlightenment because he took the Buddhist vows. And in Vajra teachings, most masters never became enlightened until they did the final Tantra techniques, which involved intercourse basically with a female consort. He didn't do that because he took the Buddhist vows. And they say that he didn't attain enlightenment, full enlightenment, until the moment of his death. And he emitted a rainbow body at his time of death. He was a very important Buddhist teacher. The Buddha actually prophesied him. I don't know if I can tell you the story really quick enough, but when Shakyamuni Buddha was approached in the forest one day by a young boy who gave him a rosary bead, a set of rosary beads, but they were crystal beads, so they were quite a pretty expensive gift for a little kid to offer to Buddha. And Ananda could see that the Buddha was troubled after this boy gave him the gift. And Buddha got a long walker, and he gave this conch shell to this long walker. And he told him where to bury it in the land of the snows, which was Tibet. So this long walker had to walk all the way from India to Tibet, probably took many months, had to go to a specific mountain that the Buddha told him to go to, and he buried this conch shell at this location. And so now you fast forward, almost Buddha was 500 AD, so almost 2,100 years into the future, this Tibetan master is born, Tsongkhapa. His followers tell him to slow down because he's teaching too much. So he picks Ganden Monastery. It's a famous monastery in Tibet, to this location on top of this mountain to build this monastery. And Tsongkhapa, he dug the first, when they build a new building, somebody digs that shovel and they take the first bit of dirt. When he dug into the ground, guess what? He found the conch shell the Buddha sent there 2,000 years before. And so he was prophesied by a Buddha that he would come to the land of the snow, do the deeds of a Buddha, and this is the guy that achieved this rainbow body. So these stories are pretty interconnected. These people are reincarnating and coming back a lot more than we think they are. And Tsongkhapa is a great example of somebody who attained the rainbow body. So for your viewers out there, reach enlightenment and then get the rainbow body when your time of death. So don't rush to get your rainbow body, because it usually involves at the moment of death. There's been documented cases where it's not death too. So, but that's typically that's what the rainbow body is all about. So this Yuga cycle really does assist in the soul growth. But you see this picture, there's always this tug of war between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And this is just kind of the natural tug of war in a binary star system. It's rise and fall of consciousness. And so sometimes I wonder, like, that when I say this is probably not a prison planet and this is just part of evolution, part of the Yuga cycle, is that we seem to rise out of these dark ages and come back into golden ages. And I think that the effects that some people are feeling now, because like anybody who want to call themselves a light worker, a seeker, everybody on the soul level knows that change is happening in the world right now. We're seeing the veil slowly lift. Things are changing. We all feel it. The sun changes as these stars start coming back together. The sun gets brighter. The sun changes. The sun changes consciousness, but it also changes in brightness. It changes weather. Why we're seeing these weird weather patterns and stuff, because we went from 25% virtue into this 50% virtue. That's a big change electrically for these two suns as well. And it's a big change for us. And we're right in the middle of it. And what we should be doing is all becoming enlightened and awakening ourselves and lifting the conscious. But we're getting caught up in spiritual fluff and a lot of this other stuff. And that's why I'm giving this presentation. I hope it sort of gives some people the tools they need to look at to kind of focus back on becoming enlightened, because I really think we'll change human consciousness a lot faster when we do that. So it's very important that this tug of war between light and dark, there's always balance. You see these yin and yang symbols here. That's really the dual sun, like we told you before. But as those two suns come together, the magnetic force is much stronger than when it's away out at the very end of aphelion. So at perihelion, you get a golden age. Aphelion, you get a dark age. But there's always this nice balance. That's how the universe works. There's balance, and that's just the way it works. And so this soul is this eternal life stream that is really on a journey back to the source. That's really the soul's journey, and we don't really get off this planet or this cyclic existence until we attain enlightenment. It's still a very valid and very important message for everybody to know and really know it. And when we get the attainment of these 8+ cities, one becomes free of this pain of ignorance. We gain knowledge and we experience bliss. And that's what all the great masters have taught. And so where I think why this really fits to exopolitics to me, and the link between exopolitics and ancient Vedic teachings, is there's quite a few reasons. Is the ancients weren't just monitoring these 24,000 minor cycles of these binaries. They were monitoring much, much larger cycles. And we don't have a really good recorded history. No race does. The Indians, the Aborigines, they're 80,000 years. They don't have very good recorded history of all of their time. So how did we get such long recorded history? Because the Vedics, they monitor a kalpa. And a kalpa is 4.32 billion years. To them, that's just one breath of Brahma. One breath of God is a kalpa. And the traditional Yuga cycle fits into a Maha Yuga, 4.32 million years. And you need to go through 1,000 of these cycles just to get one kalpa. And it's just a flash of time in the grand scale of things. And you have to ask yourself, how are they monitoring such large cycles? And I think it has a connection. And maybe, and this is where we were talking earlier, somebody came here in Vimanas in our past. They're mentioned at the time of Rama, which was 5000 BC. Vimanas were in the Kalachakra War in time of Krishna, which is 3000 BC. They've got diagrams of Vimanas. I told you in the last series there was 4 types of Vimanas. One was flying within a continent, 2 were intercontinental, 1 was interplanetary. You know, I don't think this is Vedic science fiction. These people had flying machines in our past, and they were all concerned about only one thing, our enlightenment. They were teaching enlightened, higher consciousness. The whole purpose of them interacting with us seems to be about enlightenment. And the other interesting thing is Rama had green skin and Krishna had blue skin. Their skin was different colors. Another interesting thing is the celestial abode of Krishna was a place called Vaikuntha. And I always thought Vaikuntha was like kind of a spiritual abode of like Tashita heaven or Ganden, where these higher beings go after they pass. But Krishna's celestial abode actually has coordinates. It's in the it's in Capricorn. It's in the constellation Capricorn. They tell you which star it's beside and what the distance is in yogins. That's how they measure distances between planets. So they give you the full coordinates of this celestial abode of Krishna. So it is possible in the last golden age that we actually created these Vimanas. We don't give ourselves a lot of credit that we were at a high time about 13,500 years ago, time of Atlantis. We could have had this technology ourselves, and we lost it as we fell into the dark age. Or that consciousness might have been high enough in the last golden age that these extraterrestrial races, the good ones, the ones that you want to come to visit, would actually visit us. I think when you're in a dark age, you get archons and grays and reptilians, but when you switch into the golden age, you get these blue skin, green skin, higher races, higher worlds. And I'll tell you right now, anybody listen to all these memes on the internet, these higher worlds wouldn't be promising you Neshara cash. They wouldn't be promising you quick evacuation, twin flames, all this stuff that's promised. In the past, they were here to teach us about enlightenment. And when they come again, I would imagine the topics will be very similar. So there is a direct connection. Once you get into true spirituality, the connection with science and the connection with exopolitics is direct. There's like, for me, there's really no separation. I think that there's a direct connection. We've just had a separation in the dark age. So here's the traditional Maha Yuga cycle, where it's a 4-3-2-1 ratio. But in this model, and this is what most Vedic researchers will tell you, that a Yuga lasts 4.32 million years, the Yuga cycle. And in this cycle, you can see over here that Dwarpa Yuga or Kali Yuga is 432,000 years long. Come on. Sorry. I got a cat that's going to walk right across the computer here any second or lay on my neck. So the Kali Yuga in this old model is a very long time. And now Krishna was here in 3000, he departed in 3102 BC. So most Vedic researchers believe that we're only 5,000 years into the Kali Yuga, and that we still have 427,000 years of the Dark Age left. If that was the case, there's no point in doing these presentations. All the hard work you've done in the last 30 years of your life, Alfred, we're just wasting our time because we still got 427,000 years of the Dark Age left. And what Shri Yukteswar said is that we lost this in the Dark Age. We lost our almanacs. We lost our real calendar systems. We lost everything. We lost the teachings. These teachings I'm giving you right now, we lost them in the Dark Age. And how you can test this, why this model doesn't work, and I've had this problem, and so any traditional Vedic person who wants to debate this, it's very easy to look at. They know, I told you before, that they track position of planets and stars when Rama was born and when Krishna was born. They're very good astronomers back then. So we know the exact date these two guys came. And we also know which Yuga they came in. So if you read Vedic research, Rama came in Treta Yuga. And Krishna came in to usher in the Dark Age. So he came basically, a lot of people say he came right on this line. And after Krishna departed, we went straight into the Dark Age. And why it doesn't work is in this traditional model, a Dwapara Yuga is 864,000 years. So how can Krishna only be 2,000 years, 5,000 BC to 3,100 BC is only a 2,000 year difference between Krishna and Rama, yet they don't fit this model. It's impossible. No matter how you play with it, you cannot fit the time of Krishna or Rama in this model. The other thing that I don't like about the traditional Yuga theory is when we finish the Dark Age, it's like, bam, you go straight into a golden age. It's just like instant. The universe doesn't work that way. And when you see the yin and yang symbol, which represents a binary star system, it doesn't just go bang into Dark Age to golden age. It's a progression. And when you look at Sri Akshara's model, our history and Krishna's history and Rama's history fits his model. It doesn't fit this model. We got the length of the Yuga cycle wrong, and it happened in the Dark Age. And Sri Akshara said this as well. It just doesn't work, Alfred. So, Sri Akshara, that's him over here. That's Yogananda. He was the main guru of Yogananda. These are important people. Here's a Buddhist plugging Kriya Yoga masters, contemporary almost Kriya Yoga masters, but they were important people. Their teachings, the reason I'm sharing his stuff with my teachings is they all aligns. It really fits together. And he said that he formulated a non-traditional view of these Yuga cycles. He said we got the almanacs wrong during the Kali Yuga. We went into the Dark Age and we lost everything. And we really did. And he said we don't have 427,000 years of Kali Yuga left. Very grim prospect. And he actually did a calculation, and he was a very competent astronomer, and I've checked his calculation. I'm very certain that he was right. You know, I'm surprised more people don't know about this man. A lot of people do, but not enough as far as I'm concerned. And he got this theory just not from him. He didn't just pull us out of the air. In the law of Manu, Manu is this celestial king that rules for like 309 million years. You get 14 Manus in one Kalpa. And that's the other thing when I realized that there obviously is an exopolitical component to this is how can anybody on Earth measure 300 million years? It has to come from somewhere else. These calendars had to come from somewhere else, from a more advanced race that brought it to us, because I don't think we've recorded history enough to get this. So there is a connection there. And he said that the precession of the equinox is caused by this celestial body. We used to think it was really caused by the moon pulling the, going around the thing and pulling it. But some Caltech researchers also found out that some of our outer bodies by the Kuiper belt were getting pulled by some celestial body, and that's where this planet 9 came in. So it's not just some theory that came from the past. We have modern researchers saying the same thing, and we'll go through that in a minute. But these two and he talked about an electric universe. These two bodies, it takes 12,000 years to go completely out and 12,000 years to come back. So we're coming back now. So we're on the ascending arc, which we're heading towards a golden age, and then they'll go out again. And they said it was a 24,000 year cycle. Modern supercomputers say it's 25,625 years. And I think they didn't properly calculate that with using supercomputers, because binaries speed up as they get closer and closer to perihelion. They speed up and then they slow it down as they go out. So we didn't model this right. So we're probably wrong, and the 24,000 is probably closer. And the interesting thing is he's talking about the electric universe before anybody knew about electric universe. He's talking about how it affects the soul consciousness. These 5 aural electricities that were identified by Shri Yukteswar are really the effects of these of the sun, both suns, as they come together and as they go out, and how the virtue rises and falls with these 2 suns. So I did some new drawings for you just so people could quickly see, is that when the sun and its binary are furthest apart, so binary systems go like this, you have what's called a dark age, because the magnetic effects of those 2 charged plasma spheres are the furthest apart as they can be. And so the magnetics is different, eclipses would be different, and consciousness is different. And so when you're in a dark age, mental virtue is only at 25%. So up until like the 1700s, mental virtue on this planet was at 25%. And that's why we've seen dark ages, wars, Chinese wars, Persian wars, just war after war, killing, murders, all this horrible stuff. And we reached that point at 510 AD. So then I thought, well, what happened at 510 AD on this planet that might be significant? And guess what? 500 AD is when the fall of the Roman Empire happened. And it didn't really just fall. It's when its structure and its size collapsed through infighting and greed and everything else. All dark things fall. It just went into hiding and became more secretive. And Europe still had its dark age after the fall of the Roman Empire, but pretty significant that it falls exactly when those 2 suns are the furthest apart. So our history fits that. And then as they come back together and they reach perihelion, that's the seat of Brahman, that's the seat of Vishnu, that Yabi, that's the seat of God. That's when virtue is at 100% and we're in a golden age. And a golden age lasts 4 times longer than, it's almost 9,500 years we get a golden age in this model. So golden age lasts a long time. But you also get some issues when these 2 suns come together. You would get potential pole shifts. You could get a flood. The biblical flood could have happened at this time because that brown dwarf, which our twin probably could pull the poles where they shift, and where the ice caps on each pole used to be, they might be in a warm area now. And then so the ice caps have to form in another place, but they melt in between, and you would get a quick flood. And they're now finding with the ice age, they thought it was very slow. Now they're talking about a fast flood, a fast thaw, a fast freeze and then a fast thaw. It might have, and they all go back about 12,500 BC, because that's when the last time we were in the golden age was 12,500 BC. And the interesting thing about that time was that was the time when Atlantis supposedly fell. That was the time we had the Great Flood, apparently. And another thing is that's the time they built Göbekli Tepe. They built this astronomical round device, kind of like a Stonehenge-looking device, 12,000 years ago, and then they buried it with stones. Why? And I think they were buried. They knew this. They knew this. The twin was coming in. There was going to be a cataclysm, and they wanted to save these ancient sites for us today. So when we dig them up, which we're doing right now, we would figure out what they were for, and we would get back into the right processes that we need for enlightenment into the next golden age. I think that's why Göbekli Tepe was buried. I really do. I think we're misreading that site. And spiritual evolution is affected by these electrics between these suns. So consciousness rises and falls. And the only way to really, this can happen in a solar system, Alfred, is if it's binary, because the Yuga cycle is repetitive. It has to be a binary system. 70% of all stars are binary. I think ours is. I think we're in a binary star system, and we always have been. And it's the true cause of this. This is what's causing it, the rising and fall of the Yuga cycles. So then we have these Caltech researchers more recently. This is not that long ago they discovered this. And they discovered that there was a 9th planet with this bizarre elongated orbit. And they they didn't see it with a telescope. They discovered it by mathematical modeling. And what happened there, Alfred, is they're monitoring all these other objects out beyond the Kuiper belt. And what they realized is that all of these orbits of these different objects, they had different speeds, they had different orbits, but they were all pointing in the same direction. Something was causing them all to point in one direction. So when they did the mathematics to this, they realized there was a big object out in our solar system, beyond Pluto, way beyond Pluto. And they claim it has a 10 to 20,000 year orbit, because binaries can have a 1 or 2 year orbit where they come in every 2 years, and they can have 100,000 year orbits if the one's really big and one's really small. It kind of depends how big the orbit is, right? And doesn't it make you wonder that now we have Caltech researchers saying that there's this object that has the 10 times the mass of Earth, that's way out there. They call it a planet. They don't want to call it a binary yet. Calling it a planet, and it has a 10 to 20,000 year period. And here we have this ancient Vedic researcher. Well, he wasn't ancient, but Shiriktrishra is saying that we got a 24,000 year dual sun, and it was actually written in the laws of Manu thousands of years before Shiriktrishra. So our ancients knew this, and I think that they knew this not based on recording this thing over and over and over many, many times. I think they knew it, that somehow in our golden age, there was people flying Vimanas with blue skin, and they either told us about this and shared this information because we were in a golden age. We weren't killing each other. The good ones, the ones you really want to see, probably had open contact with us, I think, way back when, in the last golden age. I think that we were probably in contact with these people. So it wasn't visually seen. It was discovered by mathematical modeling. But the interesting thing now is at least they know which area of space to look at. So Shiriktrishra's theory is really not that crazy when you think about it. Now, you remember this model. This is Shiriktrishra's, where he's talking about the... Got a cat fight going here now. Hey, you guys, stop it. Stop it. Trying to teach your audience the path to enlightenment. I can't even control 2 cats. So this is Shiriktrishra's basic diagram of this 24,000 year period. So on the descending arc, you have a 12,000 year period where it goes through Satwa Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwarpa Yuga. You go into a dark age, and then on the ascending arc, you come out of this and you go back through the dark age, Dwarpa Yuga, Treta Yuga, and into a golden age. So this is the true rising and falling of consciousness. This is the yin and yang symbol of these 2 stars and how they affect consciousness. And we were at the nearest point back here. The time was 11,500 BC was the last time our dual sun was in the vicinity of us. And that was exactly the time roughly where Atlantis fell. We don't know the exact date, but it was in roughly that time. It was probably roughly the time the last ice age happened. And another interesting thing, it was also the time this Göbekli Tepe was built, this megalithic rock architecture device that was found in Turkey. It was built in that time. And I'll show you how all of these devices can predict lunar eclipses. So you tell me why 12,000 BC, we have this device, an astronomical ground calculator that can accurately predict lunar eclipses 12,500 years ago. We knew this in our past. We knew this a long, long time ago. And I would think that during this golden age up here, that's when we were visited by these nice blue skin, green skin, advanced extraterrestrial races, the ones you really want to be dealing with. I think they interacted with us. I think we probably knew about them, they knew about us. There was information shared probably. And then the duel came in. So maybe Göbekli Tepe was buried for a reason. It was buried by small stones. It was this perfect megalithic, and it would have taken years and years to bury this thing with stones about this big, the whole site. They buried it. They preserved it. It was buried. It didn't just get buried with time. Somebody went and took small boulders and completely buried this site. And so now we start falling on this descending arc. And this is where I was saying, when the old model, Krishna doesn't fit it, Rama doesn't fit it, our history doesn't fit it. But when you look at this 24,000 year model, you have Rama, who came in 5001 BC in Treta Yuga. It falls directly on Treta Yuga. You have Krishna, who came in 3100 02 BC. He came in Dwarpa Yuga. It fits into Dwarpa Yuga. All of a sudden, this model works. And then you have one other person named Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He came in the 1400s. He was the last known incarnation of Krishna. And they say Krishna must come at the end of Kali Yuga. And he was right here in 1400 towards the end of Kali Yuga. And I think if I can just go down, I didn't get it all fit on the thing here, but if you go down into here, you see Krishna fits. Right there is where the Mayan calendar starts. So the Mayan calendar started in 3114 BC. And do you know that the Mayan civilization never started to about 400 to 600 AD? So why did they have a calendar that goes back to 5000 BC? 3114 BC. And it's only 12 years out from the time of Krishna's passing. I think there's a connection here. I think these people flew these Vimanas, these ancient priest class, flew Vimanas all over the globe, and they went to the Mayans and taught them things. And there's even history where a Vedic guy by the name of Hognan went to the Mayans. So you can talk to some Kriya Yoga Hindus, and they'll tell you this. They'll tell you about their journeys around the globe. And then we have this thing called OMAC, which everybody thought was just a medicine wheel in the prairies of Alberta, which I was talking to you earlier. It is also another 5,000 year calendar out in the prairie of Alberta. What were they recording for a 5,000 year? Like, I know the researcher said they were just nerds and they were recording this for fun. But when it lies so close to the death of Krishna, I think the two are connected. And the Mayan calendar ended in December 12th, 2012. Which is exactly 5,124 years. So we have the Mayan calendar, 5,124. Then we have a 5,000 year calendar out in Alberta. And when I talked to the researcher, I said, could this be plus or minus 200 years? And he goes, that's exactly what it is. It's plus or minus 200 years. So it can fit. I think these two calendars might be the same calendars. It's very, very probable that they are. Monitoring the same in totally different spots. And then you have Stonehenge that they say appears right here at about 2000 BC. They're now thinking Stonehenge is 45 to 7,000 years maybe old. It might go right back to the time of Rama. And they found there's a Stonehenge in Armenia, there's a Stonehenge in Egypt, and they're all really, really old. So these Stonehenge devices are all kind of lie in this time frame. So we have the ability to predict lunar eclipses thousands of years ago. And that's what these devices were made for. They can do other things. They can track other celestial things, but they can very, very accurately predict lunar eclipses. Like Stonehenge can be 99.98% accurate. And I'll show you that later. But what I wanted to show you this model is how our history fits this model is you go down to here, 10,040 BC, that's the time of King David. And right as we enter the Dark Age here, Alfred, Buddha appears. We have the fourth Buddha come, right in the middle of the Dark Age. And as we get right down to the very bottom of the barrel of the Dark Age, Yeshua appears at a very dark time. The important people come at important times. He came right in the dark age. And right at 500 AD, which we were right here, that's when you saw the fall of the Roman Empire. And then as we enter the ascending arc, so the two suns are the furthest point right here. As we start entering this ascending arc, we have the European Dark Age. So the European Dark Age was about 500 AD to roughly 1600 AD, where they were having people, putting them in racks, all the horrible torture in Europe. The Europe still had their Dark Age, and our Dark Age fits this Dark Age. And Shirak said that we left Kali Yuga exactly in about 1700 AD. And if you look at history, right around 1700 AD to 1800 AD, that's when they had the first age of enlightenment in Europe. That's when Voltaire and some of these bigger thinkers started appearing on the scene. They started thinking outside the square. Bigger thinking. The church didn't have so much control. But there's a period after each Yuga cycle called a Sandis period. And it lasts 200 years. When you go to the next one, it'll be 300 years. And then you go to the next one, and they overlap. So you get this period of kind of where you're still half in the Dark Age and still half in Dwarpa Yuga. This is where we've been for World War I, World War II, the last 300 years. So if you go from 1700 to 2012, it's roughly 300-year period, which our timeline fits that sort of. We come out of December 21st, 2012 was really just kind of the start of this shift where we fully left and went into Dwarpa Yuga. And a lot of people were saying, oh, this is hopium. This is not hopium. This is important for people to realize where we're at in the evolution on our planet, because mental virtue now went from 25 to 50%. Sort of in the last sort of 50 years, we've been feeling the effects of this. That's what all the light workers are feeling. That's why everybody's searching and trying to figure this stuff out, is because virtue really doubled. This is the biggest jump we'll ever take throughout the rest of the Yuga cycle. We went from 25 to 50%, which is technically 100%. We went from very ugly to 50%. 50% virtue. We've reached the point where enlightenment and attaining enlightenment is important again. Becoming spiritual, following a higher path, all this stuff that we should be doing. Now's the time. Don't get pulled down in all of this false hope, all these false teachings, but now is really truly the time to take this next step, because Shirak was right. I'm telling you, we are in the ascending arc of Dwarpa Yuga, and we still have this omega point where, do we change dimensions? Do we actually have a physical dimensional change at some point where we go to the fourth, and maybe when we get to the golden age or somewhere in Treta Yuga, we go up to the fifth? The Gnostics call it the omega point, where something changes. So if you look at most Western astrologers, they really don't know when we go from the age of Pisces to the Aquarius. That's kind of the same time where I think where this omega point occurs. So we're in the zone now. We're in a period where the change is going to be very rapid. It's going to continue on like this. And the best thing we can do individually is become enlightened. Because Shirak measured in 1894 that we were right in this position. He measured the vernal equinox. He checked all the star systems. He said we got it wrong. And when I look at this model, our history fits it so perfectly. And the effect of consciousness is the only cyclic thing that could happen that could create a Yuga cycle like this. We can't just be, some new agers say we're moving into a band of space, and that's why everything's changing right now. It's kind of true. We did move into a band of space. These two suns are coming closer together now. And we have entered a new band of space. Energy has changed. We went from 25 to 50%. That's pretty profound. That's what we're all feeling. That's why, even the planet's feeling it, because the sun's changed, the electromagnetics of the suns change, and we get sunspots and things like that. And then the planets everything changes. It changes consciousness. It changes the physical things, weather. That's why we're getting all these weird storms. Everything is related to this. And I really believe that's where we're at in the Yuga cycle. And I think it's important to understand this because you need to understand the effects, how the soul is affected by magnetics and electrics. And then you'll really understand this teaching. And there's kind of two parts. There's at the Yuga level, which is really a binary star system, but it's also at very local level with eclipses. So that we don't reach Treta Yuga till 4100 AD, but we reach the golden age in 7700 AD, and then we get right back to the top at 12,500 AD. So that's when our dual returns. That's why these Caltech guys probably won't find this mysterious ninth planet for a while yet, because it's still a long ways out there. It's a brown dwarf, and it's probably, it's 10,000 years away, and they move fairly quickly. So it's a long ways away. It's I really don't think Nibiru should be your big concern right now. I know there's a whole bunch of memes around that, and it's coming, and it was supposed to come last year. It was supposed to come in 2012. Now it's coming in 2024. I don't think it's coming for a long time, but I do think it's affected our consciousness on this planet. So it's important to kind of understand this. So just, we know where we're at again. Like, I really think it's important to know where we're at in this cycle. So we're kind of doing the right things. So Shakyamuni Buddha, I mentioned to everybody, he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree when he was almost dead. He gave up on this rigid path that he was following, and he sat under this Bodhi tree and was just about at death's door. His Buddha nature sank, and all of a sudden he became enlightened. So I always thought, well, did Buddha know this? Did Buddha know about eclipses? Because I know about eclipses. Like, I'm giving you this teaching. This is not just lots of research. There's an experience here. So I know for a fact that when you shift, when your consciousness shifts, is during an eclipse. I know this. When I back engineered it, I realized that all the ancient masters knew this. This teaching was everywhere, and maybe we need to know it again. But maybe it was more than just a full moon. Maybe it was a blood moon when he became enlightened. So we're just hypothesizing here so far, because we don't know the exact days and stuff. But so how I know Buddha knew this, and this is where you have to do a lot of research and just catch these little subtle things, is this thing called the Kalachakra Tantra. Now, this is a complete teaching, and Buddha gave this teaching to the first Kalki king of Shambhala. His name was Satchandra, and Satchandra recorded this teaching by memory. So he was and I think there was 90 priests and rishis came with him from Shambhala. They actually came. Now, I don't know if they came from inner earth and came up, like that's how the story's kind of told, or did they come from another planet and that teaching was given to them. But he returned to Shambhala, and Shambhala became an enlightened society based on the teachings he gave. Now, this teaching was separate from the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. This was a separate teaching that he gave. He didn't give this openly to everybody. He just gave it to this first Kalki king. And today we only got fragments of the Kalachakra Tantra. Surprise, surprise. We lose calendars. We lose these ancient teachings. Why do we only have fragments of it? And their calendar system is almost identical to the Vedic one. And the Kalachakra is really equivalent to a unified field theory. It explains the structure of atoms, the workings of the cosmos, the body, everything. And it's complete. It has everything in it. And this is what blew me away. It has the mathematics. So this is 2500 BC, or sorry, 500 BC. This is the time of Buddha. This is 2500 years ago, Alfred. Buddha gave this first king of Shambhala, the first Kalki king, this teaching, and it includes the mathematics for predicting lunar eclipses 2,000 years in advance. Now, I don't know if Buddha was a mathematical expert, but there's so many great minds in India. You know, if it wasn't for great minds in India, this whole presentation would be 5 minutes and it would be over with. You know, they're the source of this knowledge, and these great Hindu minds basically are the source of all this information, but he probably found a mathematician that could do the mathematics to do this, because they were aware of precession of the equinox. You know, Western astronomers weren't aware of it until around about the time of Plato. We weren't even aware of the precession. These guys knew this a long, long time ago. And he had the mathematics. Buddha had the mathematics. And the more esoteric tantra practices, which involves a union of a man and woman, because that Buddha nature, this inner orb, the soul that lies below, tantra, sexual practices can also pull it down and then allow it to rise up for reset. So even Tsongkhapa didn't attain enlightenment because he didn't do these final tantra practices. So in the past, you pretty much had to go through some of these tantra practices to be fully awakened. But Buddha didn't. Buddha wasn't in a tantra practice. And I know for a fact that you don't have to be in a tantra practice during a lunar eclipse to become awakened. It will help. And all these practices were performed in Shambhala. Guess what, Alfred? During total lunar eclipses. These are the little subtle things that you pick up on later. It's all there. People can go research this themselves. It is all there. So they knew this. This was Buddha's teaching, so he knew about eclipses. And the reason I don't think it was openly shared, and we've talked about this before, and it's kind of why I sat on this information for 7 years almost before we were talking 7 years ago. That presentation we did this summer, I basically prepared for you 7 years ago, was I think it was withheld because we were entering in the golden age. You remember on that Yuga cycle, Buddha came right at the beginning of the dark age. He knew a dark age was coming. He probably knew that the left-hand path people, you know who they are, would maybe abuse this teaching for dark purposes. Maybe that's one of the reasons. And the other reason is, in the dark age, when you become enlightened, it's more dangerous to become enlightened in a dark age than in the golden age, because a dark age, you have these archons, negative influences that are also here. That's part of the cycle of, you know, that ancient cycle I showed you, that yin and yang, that cycling of consciousness. So the attack on a newly enlightened person was much more severe. You've heard of the term dark night of the soul. Enlightenment could actually be a difficult time for somebody if they weren't around other enlightened people, shielded from the negative mountain spirits, archons, whatever you want to call them, because they find people when they're first awakened. One of your viewers actually wrote in and said they said they had the experience and the same thing happened. They were actually, it's a short period, and I think in the past monks used to want to be with you when you went through this, because if you're around a bunch of enlightened people when you awaken, negative influences probably aren't going to come around. You're kind of shielded by that light from those other people, right? So they took this kind of seriously, and people watching this still need to take this seriously. I'm giving you a teaching that you got to take seriously. You got to be ready before you do some of these final things. Spiritually, you know, you can't be full of hate and anger and fear and all these other things. You got to be a pretty strong, grounded person, kind of advanced in your path before you take some of these final teachings. But it's important to know them. At least you'll know them so that when you get to that point, you know what you need to do. It's there for you. And that's why I'm giving it now. But I have worried about giving that I might be doing this too early. But after you have a near-death experience, you kind of want to get this out there, because if I go through that again, it's a good chance I'm not going to be around to give it. So it's best to get it, record it, get a book out there. That's kind of why I've done all of this, and why I've done it with you, because I really think it's connected with exopolitics. I don't think there really is a separation there. So he gave this teaching to this first king of Shambhala. Now, some people think it's a mythical kingdom inside the earth, and it could be. There's people that watch over the currents of the world from Shambhala. They apparently have sent representatives every 100 years to our leaders. So some of our leaders in our past have had representatives apparently come to them. So they must look like us if they can just, some of them can come onto the surface or come and go talk to a leader. Some claim it exists in a different bardo, so it could be at a higher, subtler dimension, potentially. I think it could even have a celestial component, simply because Vishnu Yasa, which is the last father of the Kalki avatar, the last avatar that's still to come yet, the guy on the white horse, guy on the white horse in Revelations, the guy, it's on a white horse. The story in Christianity and Vedic and Buddhist, it's all kind of the very similar story. A guy comes out at the end of the age on a white horse and defeats evil forces. It could be from another planet potentially too. And the reason I think that is because Krishna's abode, or Vishnu's abode, because Krishna and Vishnu are the same being basically, they give the coordinates in the constellation Capricorn. They actually give a physical location with the distance. So it is possible, these advanced races had bases in the earth, just under the surface maybe, and then there was actually worlds, and we kind of mixed it up and created a world within the center of the earth, because that's potentially not really the case. I don't know. I know Shambhala exists. I know it's in our history, but whether or not it was just a base here and the actual place is somewhere else, not 100% sure. And I don't think anybody really is. That's kind of a hard one. Interesting thing about that rider on the white horse, though, is all the other prophecies, like the Hopi prophecy, they have the return of Pahana, who's a white-skinned god that comes from the sky. So he comes in a Vimana. The Mayan prophecy really wasn't the end of time. It was the return of Bolinyapti. And Bolinyapti, guess what he was? He was another white-skinned god that came from the sky in a Vimana. And some of the stuff in Revelations they talk about, he comes with his 144,000 warriors, celestial warriors from heaven. They come from heaven. So, they might not literally come from heaven like we think heaven. They just come from outer space, or they come from a different planet, right? So I think there is a very much a connection with other worlds in this ancient teaching and what happens in our future as well. And some interesting things about Kalachakra astronomy is the sun and the moon. The sun follows the ecliptic, which is a band around the planet, and the moon kind of follows a different course when it comes in. But there's a position above the moon and below the moon. There's these nodal points. And this is the points that these ancients were monitoring. They were monitoring these nodal points. And the reason why, Alfred, is when it comes through the top part, you get a solar eclipse. And when it comes through the bottom, you get a lunar eclipse. And that's why they were monitoring these two bands above and below the moon. And that's what all these ground-based Stonehenge, probably Göbekli Tepe, all of these sites can be used for predicting where when these, because then when the eclipse is coming, right? And in Kalachakra astronomy, Vedic astronomy, they call them Rahu and Ketu. And here's another mistake where I said they got the Yuga cycle mixed up. The length was a Maha Yuga, but it really is precession of the equinox. They got that mixed up. I'm like 99% sure Jishwar was right on this. But where they also got this mixed up, if you talk to a modern Vedic astrologer, they'll tell you Rahu and Ketu are planets. It's like a dark planet. So when a solar eclipse comes, this Ketu comes in and creates a solar eclipse by blocking the moon, a separate planet. And when a lunar eclipse occurs, Rahu comes in and blocks it. And we know that doesn't occur. So they got this mixed up. it's not, the ancients weren't tracking separate planets. Ra, Ulan, Ketu, I don't care how good you think you are at Vedic astronomy, they are not planets, period. They are points in the sky, and they're points that can determine eclipses. And in Kalachakra astrology, they call them Ra-U and Caligni. So the name's almost the same. That's why I said there's a lot of overlap with Kalachakra and the Vedic information. So the astronomy of enlightenment. So we taught, you wanted to know, how does this soul progress? How does it move? And in most humans, the soul resides below these two bottom chakras in most cases. Now you can, a psychic can bring that chakra up to the third eye and have clairvoyance and stuff, but it doesn't mean they're enlightened because it hasn't reached the crown chakra. This is where the nirvanic body, the seventh body and the seventh chakra, this is where you connect to God. This is God consciousness, because when you shift your consciousness to the crown chakra, you're now open up to the whole multiverse. So the multiverse assists in evolution of consciousness through binary star systems, through eclipses. But I guess you could say at the omniverse level, at the soul level, you get that whole expanded consciousness because you're connected to everything then. And that's where allness or oneness, or isness, all this stuff comes in, is when you shift your consciousness to the crown chakra, you do kind of enter a different bardo because you're connected to all things at that point. And so and this is the key, watch this chakra move now. This is my big value added for the night. It must go below before it goes up. Do you see that? It must sink below. So in Buddha's case, being really fatigued or almost given up on life, he sunk below this chakra, because you can pull it all the way up, it'll just go right back down to its normal position. You pull it up again, it has to sink below and flip 180 degrees, and then it goes up. That's the Kundalini rising. That's the Diamond Thunderbolt of Zen. It's instantaneous once you do that. So you can understand by watching this, if you understand, this is the mechanics of enlightenment now. If you understand the mechanics of enlightenment, you will understand why it's important to do it at the right time. Timing, lunar eclipse. You see the lunar eclipse up here? Very important. So the magnetics and electrics are right. And your technique must be right. So you must be able to effortlessly sync that Buddha nature without using your mind. If you go out and watch a lunar eclipse, and you're using your mind to push your soul consciousness down, nothing's going to happen because your mind is there. The mind must stop. Like I said before, any meditation must remove the obstacles of the mind and the body. The mind has to stop naturally, and that's where nature comes in. Zen and nature. I live in a beautiful place, lots of trees, forests. Nature is so key. Nature, technique, and timing. Those are the three things. If you take anything home with you tonight from this presentation, those are the three things that are most important. You got to be in nature. You got to be able to stop the mind effortlessly. So, because the mind spinning up here is what pushes the Buddha nature down. The Buddha nature is never fully revealed because the mind thinks it's the center of your universe. So back to that old model that I gave you with these three balls on the rope. This is your sun mind that thinks it's the center of the universe or your existence. It thinks it's the leader. It has all the concepts, and it just spins and spins with desires. It's stuck in the material world. It uses the physical earth body for pleasure and kind of like just uses it for pleasure, basically. And the Buddha nature, the spirit, is overshadowed. And so it's stuck in the lower chakras because this mind is just spinning and spinning. It's created its identity, its ego. It thinks it's the center of you. So, we're in this perpetual eclipse of ignorance where our mind is just spinning around and around and around in circles. And the Buddha nature is pushed deep into the lower chakras, and it's never fully revealed. And it's the true consciousness. It's the true God spark of you. It's your true essence. And to feel perpetual bliss, to feel the bliss of enlightenment, you must shift it permanently, not temporarily. So people can have glimpses of enlightenment. You hear a lot of people say, I'm awakened, and they might have read about the Illuminati and all the history and galactics, and they think they're awakened, but they haven't experienced the bliss that Buddha did, or Jesus did, or Eckhart Tolle, or anybody. Like, that's a different type of bliss. That's perpetual bliss. And you have to basically shift that Buddha nature. It must go low and then go high and reach the crown chakra. And when it reaches the crown chakra, that's when it expands out and you get that solar aura, the halo, why you see those halos in Christian art, Vedic art, Buddhist art. There's always a halo around the head. And that's just representing somebody who shifted that inner light, the Buddha nature, to the crown chakra. And they get a halo. Some people can actually see them. So that's the technique, or that's the mechanics of enlightenment. So if you understand this, you can imagine how much time it can take off your path to higher consciousness. Because you could be doing this Kriya Yoga technique for decades. You're doing everything right. You're following the higher path, and still nothing. You've never experienced enlightenment because you missed this. Your timing is still wrong. Timing is important. The universe assists us in enlightenment. It assists us in higher consciousness at the Yuga level. It assists us very local level during a lunar eclipse. So why technique is really important, and something like Kriya Yoga or Vajrayana are ideal, is you really need to do this cyclic breathing. So with Kriya Yoga, you do deep breathing, so you're ingesting prana, the life force, the chi energy that's in nature, in flowers. It's in the morning sun. That's why the best time to meditate is in the rising sun in the morning, the dew on the grass, that early morning time, because nature's filled with prana. I don't know if you've ever went for a walk in Stanley Park or out in those nice forests on the West Coast where you live. It's soul refreshing when you go out there. You probably feel it at the soul level. That's prana. You're breathing prana when you walk through Stanley Park. That's why nature is so important. It's the soul food. The lungs, the physical body need air to breathe and to regenerate and get healthy cells. But the spirit, the Buddha nature, needs prana. And you need the prana comes from nature. So in a Kriya Yoga, and I don't want to really go into the technique, but when they breathe in deeply, they slowly let the Buddha nature rise through the Shushannama region of the spine, which is basically your central nervous system. And so when you breathe in deeply, you let it rise up through each chakra. And they also have mantras like the mantra of Krishna, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So that at the first chakra, it's Om Manu Vasudeva, and they cyclically repeat that mantra as they do in this cyclic breathing, moving your life force through your chakra system. Why that's so important is because it has to, when you're watching it during an eclipse, it has to sink below that the root chakra, and it has to flip. So you, as a practitioner, have to be able to move your consciousness effortlessly without your mind during the eclipse. That's the key. You know, this is a key. You know, there's a story about the key of David where it unlocks. I told you this the last time. It unlocks one door so it can never again be closed, and closes another door so it can never again be open. Maybe it's a spiritual key, because it's probably not a physical key. Because this key that I'm showing you right here, if you know how to use this and you have the right technique and you unlock your spiritual door, your Buddha nature, it's there permanently. You can't become unenlightened. Somebody might try that someday in the future. I don't know why you never want to do it, but you know, human nature, we might try to do that. But it's permanent. So once that's unlocked, it rises up. The Kundalini rises up, and it's permanent, and it's bliss forever. And then you have the ability to reincarnate again here to help other people, or you can go on in your spiritual journey and move on to a higher dimension. That's how you get off this planet. You know, nobody's going to come with a Vimana and take you off and throw you bags of Nessera cash and give you a twin flame. You know, like, you got to use some discernment on some of this stuff. And so it's very important to drop below that last chakra. So you got to go really low before you go high. And then when I said the old masters left us the clues, Buddha's clue was he almost was at the point of death. So he dropped really low, and then he came really high. Wei Ning was very young, but he just heard one line of a sutra. He dropped very low because he was fatigued from hauling firewood. You can be fatigued other ways. You could start writing a book. Remember I told you that story? There's all kinds of ways to fatigue the mind so the mind's not in the way when you go out and watch an eclipse. And I think that's why these ancient megalithic sites can predict eclipses with such accuracy, because then the priest caste or the gurus of that time, they knew exactly when they were going to occur, and you could tire your mind out and play yourself out and start doing these cyclic breathing techniques in advance, a week or two in advance before the eclipse. You just didn't run out the night of an eclipse. Oh, look, there's an eclipse. Let's run out there and start trying to do these practices and wear the mind out. It's very hard to do that way. So that's why we have all these ancient devices that can track eclipses, because they were built for spiritual purposes. It's about time this planet realizes that that's a fact. And I think it will. It might not be in my lifetime, but someday somebody's going to dig up these old presentations of ours, Alfred. They're going to go, huh, yeah, this was right, because it is right. And they also, you can use tantric practices, which are within Vajrayana teachings, Buddhist Vajrayana. And that's where in the embrace, a guru who knows how to move this life force energy very effectively through their body can help assist with somebody who's not that adept, and they can actually use their Buddha nature to help pull that other person's Buddha nature low so it can go high. And that's why Tantra is very effective in enlightenment. But, you know, in the Western version of Tantra, it's very much sex and don't release and all this stuff. If you study Vajrayana Buddhism, there's 9 inner and outer yanas that you have to master before you get to the final Tantra practices. It's a long process. So it's a lot more complicated than we think. It's abused in the West. You know, I wouldn't go to a Tantra master in California. Pretty much guarantee you it's not going to be what you're hoping for. You got to find some of these ancient teachers and some of these Tibetan teachers, some of these gurus in India. They still exist. There's still people that really know this stuff. And I think in the future, Tantra is probably going to be used just between loving couples. They're going to know the techniques. They're going to know the timing. So a loving couple can go and do these teachings during eclipses, just like they did in the Kalachakra, just like Shambhala became an enlightened society because they were doing these esoteric tantric practices during eclipses. I'm not making this up, Alfred. This is in the Kalachakra Tantra. This is all there. So it's I think we're going to see a better version of Tantra coming out now too, where it's right, you know, like right now it's kind of abused, right? You don't want a bunch of Western men claiming they're Tantra masters and stuff like that, because that's happened already, where they want your credit card number. They're not too concerned where your Buddha nature is, it's more what your credit card number is. So how do lunar eclipses really affect Buddha nature? You know, and there's 3 properties: solids, liquids, and gases. And this other property is plasma. And we don't really understand plasma yet. And we know that suns are charged plasma spheres. So in the Yuga cycle theory I shared earlier, it's the plasma between our brown dwarf and our sun that affects the Yuga cycles. And so sun affects everything, sunlight, but it's not just our sun, it's this other sun that's affecting. So as they start coming together, we're in Dwarpa Yuga now. The electrics, the magnetics are better for enlightenment, because the virtue is increasing, everything is increasing. And what happens is the Earth and the Moon are plasma spheres too. Everything is just energy. It's just energy. So when you get 3 celestial plasma spheres, because we know the effects of the Yuga cycle with just a binary system is pretty profound. What do you think happens when a sun, the moon, and the planet are in complete alignment? Imagine the magnetics and the electrics behind that. These are the subtle, the aural electricities that Shri Yukteswar identified. They're real just because scientists can't measure them yet. They're real just the same, and it's very powerful. So we get assistance from the multiverse in the dual planetary thing, but we also get the assistance during eclipses. It's very important to understand this. So during alignments, these magnetic and electrical properties influence the inner orb and the causal body. They're influenced during eclipses. Now, there's another thing. I throw this out there because I don't know for sure, but everybody's heard of the moon matrix, right? So, Alfred, if you were an advanced race and you wanted to put some kind of psychotropic weapon or device that controls consciousness or creates a kind of an overlay matrix on physicality where you get those souls incarnating more here, kind of like the Luciferian rebellion where they wanted the souls here. They didn't want them to gain enlightenment and go on in their journey further up the spectrum of physicality or dimensions. Is if you want to create some device that does that, you would probably put that technology on the moon. That's the best place to put your antenna because you can reach all the Earth from the moon, right? So, and then, people can't come and smash the solar arrays and all the things that we would do if we could see this thing. So if that technology was on the moon and you want it to run for thousands of years, you're going to have the solar power, some kind of solar power on the moon as well, running this technology. Guess what? During the lunar eclipse, they last about 3 hours. It's the only time the sunlight doesn't touch the moon is during the lunar eclipse. So maybe the matrix goes down. Maybe because the sunlight's down, this matrix goes down during an eclipse. I don't know for sure. I think it's more the charged plasma theory that I proposed than the matrix theory. The reason why is that Tibetans believe that during a solar eclipse, universal energy is magnified 10,000 times. Vedics believe this too. So universal energy, this subtle energy, is magnified 10,000 times during a solar eclipse. Now you will not attain enlightenment during a solar eclipse. I'll tell you that right now. Solar eclipses are not a time for enlightenment. A solar eclipse is a time for sit-ins, universal prayer, because we're all co-creators. That's why I told you before, hope rises, good thoughts. It's good to have hope. And if we all sat in circles during the solar eclipses and just thought about a better world, thought about the golden age to come, and started creating it during that time, that universal energy magnifies 10,000 times. Now, if you don't believe that, you should, because the people who work against you have been using this esoteric technology or understanding, it's not technology, against us since millennia. Forever. They've been using, so if you start looking through history, you'll be absolutely blown away how many world wars and major battles started just before a solar eclipse. So the dark ones can start that battle, magnify all that fear and chaos during a battle, and it gets magnified during eclipses. In ancient times in China, they used to think that a dragon ate the sun during a solar eclipse, so everybody got into a place of fear and went outside and banged pots and pans to scare this dragon away. And there's a history or a story in their history where two ancient court astrologers got killed for not predicting an eclipse. Solar eclipse came, everybody wasn't outside panicking, banging on the pots, and they killed these guys. And that's how seriously they took it. But that's the archons or dark forces again, trying to get the maximum fear during a time when it should be, because they get the magnification of that fear. So that's why I believe that it's not a moon matrix, because solar eclipses magnify, and the sun is still touching the moon during the solar eclipse, not during a lunar eclipse, but during the solar eclipse. So there's something, it's like a lens. The Tibetans see it as a lens, and when this alignment occurs during a lunar or solar eclipse, universal energies are magnified. And the funny thing is those Tibetan gurus and Rinpoches and monks, they know this stuff. They don't openly share it, but I've often seen, I won't give the name of the Rinpoche, but he tells his students to go out and do their practices during lunar eclipses. He tells them this all the time. So they know this stuff. They just don't openly teach it because you got to be fairly advanced before they teach you some of this stuff. And the other interesting one.
Yeah, Sheldon, can I jump in here?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the clock, and I don't know how many more slides there are, but we're at the 2-hour mark. We could call time now on part 1 and then continue this tomorrow. Would that be possible?
Yeah, we could, or there's not too much left to do. I think I can wrap this up fairly quickly now.
Sure.
And
I just
if it goes
to check. Good.
Yeah, and if you want to break it into 2 parts, that's fine too.
No, fine, good. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And another interesting thing is the last known incarnation of Krishna, which was that fellow by the name of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was 1486, I think he passed. He was the last known incarnation. Krishna's probably had more incarnations than that, but he was the last known incarnation of Krishna. He came just right at the end of Kali Yuga, just like it's predicted. But he incarnated during the night of a total lunar eclipse. That's kind of profound. And he incarnated on the same day Krishna departed. So February 19th or something like that is when he incarnated. That's fairly profound. So the last known incarnation of the Das avatar of this planetary system, Krishna, who is going to be the last incarnation as the Kalaki avatar, in his last incarnation, he was born on a total night of a total lunar eclipse. It's kind of profound. It's so was Donald Trump, by the way. So I find that quite interesting. That's why I don't really jump on that sort of negative stuff about Trump just simply because he incarnated during a total lunar eclipse. I think there could be something behind that. I don't know. I don't think he's the incarnation of Vishnu. Please don't take that the wrong way. But there's something behind that, and it's, in my view, it's potentially good. It's not a negative thing at all. So just throwing that out there. So the most important thing now for people watching this is that timing and technique are equally important. And throw in nature there as well. So if you're doing the right techniques, you know about the timing now. You've watched this series, and you know about the importance to make the connection to nature. Your chances of shifting your Buddha nature have just increased exponentially. They really have. This is really important teachings for anybody on a higher path. But always remember, you must bring that mind to rest naturally. You can't stop the mind with the mind. That's a paradox. That's the first mistake most Westerners make. They start using the mind and fighting with the mind, and you got to just let it stop. That spinning of the mind just has to stop naturally. Nature is a very good way to stop it naturally. There's other ways to stop the mind. I think Buddha, Eckhart Tolle, all these guys left as clues. They were played out. They almost gave up, and their mind stopped. You see the technique? You don't have to reach a low point. You can just simply be physically tired before an eclipse. You can start fasting a couple days before one, tiring yourself out. Don't hurt your body, but just be tired so that you can just sit there and let that Buddha nature drop naturally and drop all the way. And that sudden rise to the crown will occur. So the ancients knew about this importance of timing and technique. They knew this. And they've done that again. It's got to go low, and then it goes high. So just remember that. It's got to sink below the bottom chakra, change polarity, flip. So your technique, your Kriya Yoga, you got to practice rotating that nature too, going upside down almost. And it'll sink, and then it'll go straight up. And it's almost that fast as on that dive. That's what they call getting hit by the diamond thunderbolt in Zen, or the Kundalini rising. All this stuff is just the same thing describing that nature shifting, the Buddha nature shifting. So these ancient civilizations tracked all these eclipses for spiritual purposes, period. Period. They weren't nerds just interested in this. You know, they tracked it for spiritual reasons. I know that for a fact. I just do. It's why. So this tetrad, most people miss the tetrad because everybody was putting doom and fear and, you know, we're going to get raptured on this date. So please, in the next triad coming up, have an open mind. Know what they're really about. We're in the zone. It's the reason why we really got this tetrad and triad back to back. It's very, very uncommon for that to happen. And this one that's coming up next week, it's on a super blue moon too. So everything about it's special. It's going to have more power behind it. It's going to be probably one of the most powerful lunar eclipses we're ever going to get for a long time. This one's powerful, the one's coming up. And so a lot of these so-called watchers were blown away because they fought these tetrads fell on Passover and Tabernacle, Jewish high holidays. And they thought, it's a sign from God. Well, slow down. All Jewish holidays are on new moons or full moons. All of them. They're always that way. And we know they aid in the evolution of consciousness. And we're on this ascending arc. So the power of these eclipses is going to continue to increase. So when you're in the golden age, you know, there's probably kids born enlightened. It's way, way more easier to become enlightened in that time. But we're at 50% now. We're in the zone where enlightenment is going to be easier, and teachings will be brought forward to make it easier for us. And that's why I have a little bit of hope and focus on your own enlightenment. Don't get caught up in all the other stuff. So I want to talk quickly about Vedic astrology, because I believe all of these ancient sites around these megalithic, Stonehenge, they're all representing Vedic astrology on the ground. And I'll show you how they do this. So in Vedic astrology, they have this thing called the sidereal zodiac, which they have. It's kind of like the same thing in Western, where they divide it down between the 12 signs. The Vedic has 12 signs as well, but they tend to be different lengths because they wait till the constellation completes. So it's not just these equal pieces of the pie. And then their stars are fixed against the background of the planetary motion, so it incorporates the precession of the equinox. It's already in there. So it's very accurate over the long period of time. But this is where it's key. They have this lunar zodiac, which they call a nakshatra, and there's a 28th one. The missing one is called Abhijita, and that's the king of the nakshatras. And I believe that that it's missing because the 28th one is the one where you're supposed to be doing the spiritual practice. This is lunar eclipses. Solar eclipses is when the 28th one pops out. And why is it 28? Think about it. 28 days in lunar days in a month. And that's why the Vedic calendar, or the Hebrew calendars, all these blood moons land on feast days, is because they had a lunar calendar too with a solar year. So all of their holidays always will fall on Jewish feast days and high holidays. It's just the way it is. That wasn't the sign. That's the sign everybody saw. The sign I saw was, it's time for mass enlightenment. That's what all of these tetrads are really about. And the other interesting thing in Vedic astrology is they track those nodal points of Ketu and Rahu. They weren't planets like most Vedic astrologers make the mistake now. They were the nodal points. We lost that in the Kali Yuga too. So if you looked at the Earth, you would see this ecliptic plane, this sidereal zodiac. So all they're doing on these ground devices, Stonehenge, whatever, is they're recreating what's in the sky on the ground. And if they position them just right, they can be very, very accurate in predicting solstice, eclipses, everything. And So all of these megalithic structures are astronomical devices, and they can be used to represent this Vedic sidereal zodiac. And I think they're all over the planet because somebody flew into the bananas and took this information all over the globe. Probably just before the Dark Age, they went around, knew the Dark Age was coming, and thought, well, we'll spread this information and kind of hope for the best, right? There's nothing else you really can do. And they can be used to track the position of constellations, planets, and the moon. And they can also track these nodal points. So if you look at the bottom here, this is the sidereal or the zodiac of the Vedics. So it's in the 12 constellations, but then they got these 27 spokes that represent the lunar month. So if you now go over to Nabata Playa, which is the Egyptian Stonehenge, or you go over to Stonehenge proper, or you go over to this Omak site in Alberta, look at these sites and then look at this Vedic sidereal zodiac over here. All of these sites can do exactly what's over here on this Vedic sidereal zodiac. So they can track the positions of the moon, everything on the ground very accurately. That's what these devices were. They really are all spiritual sites. Thousands of people probably became enlightened at Stonehenge over the centuries, literally. Probably the same thing, you know, this Omak, this is a medicine wheel they thought initially, but it's got 28 spokes radiating. This is on the prairies of Alberta. It's not a medicine wheel. Some medicine wheels look like this and they represented great chiefs or great hunts, buffalo hunts, all kinds of things. This medicine wheel represents Vedic sidereal zodiac. It has the potential to. And it's a 5,000-year calendar. So why do they have a 5,000-year calendar out in Alberta and a 5,000-year calendar of the Mayans? And these things all can be used to track eclipses. There's a reason for it. Our ancients knew something. And this is what's going to blow everybody away. I'm going to show you how they actually use Stonehenge to predict eclipses. It's pretty easy. And it's very accurate. Stonehenge can predict eclipses with 99.8% accuracy. That's profound, right? And I'll show you how they did it. Is they discovered these things called Aubrey holes, and there's 56 of them, and they go around the outer ring of Stonehenge. And there's 56. That's double the amount of 28 because 28 represents the lunar month, right? If you only had 28 holes, you would be able to predict the accuracy of lunar eclipses to 98%. But if you use 56 holes, you could predict and it's really simple how they do. Well, it's not that simple, but it's pretty simple how they do this, and I'll show you, Alfred. Is that because there's 56, if you move the moon's position every day 2 places, and every 13 days, you move the sun's position 2 places. And you do that throughout the year. And you can always check to make sure you're accurate just by looking at these sites. You can see where the sun and the moon is positioned, right? And these peg holes around the outside. So when a lunar eclipse is going to occur, you're going to have the moon pegged here, and you're going to have the sun peg over here for a solar eclipse, and a lunar eclipse are going to be very close to each other. So they can go around and absolutely predict when these eclipses were going to happen. Then you've got to ask yourself, why did they need such accuracy? Were these guys really nerds? Were those Plains Indians really nerds just trying to track this stuff for fun? I don't believe so. I know that they knew about eclipses, about the spiritual potential eclipses, these ancients, and they went all over the globe to teach us how to do this. And it's still there today. You can't deny what I've just showed you here. This now, a lot of people are there's shills coming out on this right now, saying that Stonehenge was erected in the 50s. And there's pictures of in 1950, they used a crane to kind of stand up. They were trying to clean up because a lot of the stones fell over, right? Maybe during the last pole shift when the duel came in. I don't know. But that was only in the 50s. Odbury, the guy where these holes were named after, he was doing this research in 1666. Long time ago. They were looking at Stonehenge long time ago. And then it was Hawkins that determine these things can accurately predict eclipses to 99.8%. That's pretty damn good. You can't get any better than that. And the reason why they have to be so accurate is because you want to know a couple days before an eclipse happens, so you can start tiring yourself out, doing the meditation techniques, and preparing yourself to play the mind out, to stop this busy mind before these eclipses occurred. And guess what, Alfred? You can do this on every one of these megalithic sites, including Göbekli Tepe, which is 12,500 years ago. So you have to tell me why they could do this 12,500 years ago, and I know why. And hopefully anybody watching this knows why. So Göbekli Tepe, 11 to 12,000 BC, roughly the time that Shiriktisha's model, when the dual came in. It has similar rock outcrops, Stonehenge, but they're refined more. You see how they're much better carvings, and they were completely buried. This is not part of the site. This was what the site was buried. Somebody came and buried this entire site. And you see these little grooves on top of the stone? That's for reflecting shadows onto the center stone so they can track these positions. So this device has a lot more to it than we think. We're reading this device wrong. Most of the research you get on Göbekli Tepe is not correct. It really isn't. And here's another example of it in the circle. You could use chalk. You could track the same way I showed you on Stonehenge. You could do the same thing with just marking chalk on a wall and using these devices. And somebody's found that a lot of these stones completely align with summer solstice, winters, they're in alignment with these certain times on the planet. So this device was accurate for predicting eclipses as well. It isn't an astronomical calculator. I think it was buried because the ancients wanted to preserve it. So they knew the dual was coming in. There was going to be cataclysms. Let's get this site buried and preserved for future generations. I think that's why it was buried. I don't know for sure. I think that my theory is probably better than most of them, though, because I know the whole teaching behind this, and a lot of researchers, they just don't even know. They don't even, most of these scientists wouldn't even believe that you can actually shift your consciousness and experience perpetual bliss. That's just the way it is. So the ancients were aware of this, and we need to look at these sites with fresh eyes. And that's why I'm giving this in the presentation, because I want more people to look at this deeper in the future. You and I this may be long into the future. But now we have this site in Omak. It's in Alberta. It's out on the prairie. The natives used to make these medicine wheels, but this is no medicine wheel. This is a totally different kettle of fish. 5,000-year calendar. It's on the same latitude as Stonehenge. It's on the same 51 degrees north. And it has 28 spokes. You see these 28 spokes radiating out from it? See these lines? These are the spokes coming out from the center, and there's 28, represents the lunar month. So the same way Stonehenge can be used, this Stonehenge has 56 places to peg mark. This has only 28. So you would get 98% accuracy predicting eclipses with this device. It can also predict solstice and everything. The researcher that was on this did an amazing job with this site, like amazing job. His name was Gordon Freeman. I actually phoned him, and he was pretty interesting what I was saying, but I think once you go into somebody fluent of a man with blue skin, maybe to help build this site, they kind of like, it's you don't get quite the same level of respect after you start saying that stuff to a seasoned scientific research. And I understand that. Like that's totally cool. But this site can both accurately mark both equinoxes and moon phases. It's more than a medicine wheel. I know some people were saying this is you don't know. This site's more than a medicine wheel. It's on the same latitude as Stonehenge, has those 28 rays. And here's an interesting fact. This is going to blow people away. Stonehenge is on the 51st degree latitude. And on that latitude is the only latitude you get an exact 90-degree angle from the midsummer sunrise, sunset to the north moonrise and moonset. You get an exactly 90-degree angle. So when you get that 90-degree angle, you can start predicting eclipses with more accuracy, when the solstices are coming with more accuracy, because you're right at 90 degrees, right? You can put these in a different position and you won't get that. It has to be within 1 degree of the 51st latitude, within 1 degree to make this site work. And Stonehenge is within 1/3 of that 1 degree. That's how accurate it is. So you can't really locate these sites anywhere else and get that ability. And guess what? On the other side, in North America, in the middle of the Alberta prairie, is another device exactly on the 51st latitude, can do the exact same thing. And the rings, outer rings of Omak is the same diameter as Stonehenge. So you tell me why there's that much connection. And it's kind of mind-boggling, but it's there for, again, their spiritual purposes. I don't care what anybody says. And they also have these rock formations in the desert of Egypt. There's one in Armenia. They found this mega henge or super henge in the UK, which is only 2 kilometers from Stonehenge, because you want to be within that 51st degree to get the accuracy. But mega henge is buried beneath the ground. It's a huge site. And they just found that. It's still completely buried. And they figure it's thousands of years older than Stonehenge. They've also found these rock outcrops in Mongolia and Tibet. And now these Nazca lines in Peru, the main researcher on that also found out that these lines were following these nodal paths of the moon and sun. So Nazca lines were built to predict eclipses. They were built much later than Göbekli Tepe and Stonehenge. And I think what happened is, as we got closer to the Dark Age, some of these sites were made quicker. They can do the same functions. They're just more crude, but they can still allow you to know when these nodal points are being crossed by the sun, so you know when eclipses are coming. All of these sites can predict the lunar eclipses. I'm not kidding you. All of them. They're very accurate sites. And this one kind of blew me away too, the Antikythera mechanism that they found this in a Greek shipwreck, Alfred. They figure it's 2,000 years old. And you can see the gear complex in here. This is an analog computer that's 2,000 years old. And guess what its sole purpose is? It can predict eclipses to infinity. There's a little lever that you can turn, and this thing will give you the time and dates of eclipses for eternity. I think it's even geared for the precession of the equinox. A 2,000-year device. Just look at the gears. That was made 2,000 years ago and found in a Greek shipwreck. So you tell me why they had that device. It must have been pretty important to the ancients to predict eclipses, to build a device they weren't just nerds like some of these researchers are claiming. They were doing it for spiritual reasons. And the ancients taught us this, and it kind of just got lost in the Kali Yuga. It's just part of the Kali Yuga. So I believe all these megalithic circular rock formations had a purpose, and they were used by this advanced society of astronomer priests. And this technology was all over the world. And they're giant calculators used to track celestial events. And they can accurately track eclipses for spiritual purposes. And I think they were constructed with, huge stones and stuff to preserve. So they lasted into the future. They could withstand a pole shift or whatever. When the dual sun came in, they withstood the winds of time, wars, people trying to knock them over. They were there for spiritual purposes. And this information was just lost and destroyed in the Kali Yuga, and religion you lose things in religion. They were there. They were all there for spiritual purposes, these devices. So that's that concludes the presentation. I really wanted to get this information out to people so they could prepare for the triads. Somebody who's advanced can they know the importance of technique and timing. They've seen the mechanics of enlightenment. I've tried to represent it the best I could in this presentation. I don't have this infinite budget to do this, like some of these shill type stuff you see out there with music, but it gets the point across, I hope. And if you understand the importance of timing and technique and nature, those three components, your individual ascension will accelerate, and you can change your own consciousness. Live in the bliss. It's not that bad.
This is just awesome. And I have one question. And it's a question which, to me, that this is just, it's almost in plain sight. And it's like you have presented like this enormous truth that is in plain sight. And the truth of the eclipses, I mean, it's just weighs with us. Why is it that this is being kept from us? Why is it that we don't see eclipse everywhere? Why is it that the knowledge of the eclipses has been eclipsed? Why is
why has the knowledge of the eclipse been eclipsed? That's great. I think it's a couple components, Alfred. I think like Shri Tishwar said, we lost the real Yuga cycle in the Kali Yuga. So when we go into a dark age, we tend to fall to our lowest mental virtues. So we lose the old teachings. Like the Library of Alexandria. We burn this stuff down. We do all this. We get religions and we hate ancient teachings. It's like the Taliban shooting at Buddhist statues, right? We do all kinds of just damn really stupid things in the dark age. And I think we lost some of that during that, just from being in the dark age. And then I think there's a concerted effort, and I talked about this earlier, by negative forces to keep us down all the time. So it's like I'm starting to see it now where shills are out there trying to make Stonehenge. It was just built in the 50s. And they create these lies and show pictures, and somebody reads that and they believe it. They instantly believe it. And, most of this stuff that I found about our history about eclipses is I actually had to go watch one. I watched one myself. And I knew at that point my teaching was complete. I knew I knew I could have taught most of this stuff on Buddhism years ago, but when I personally watched an eclipse one time in 2008, I knew my teaching was complete. But if you're just a nobody and you come to people and try to give them a teaching, if I'm not wearing a robe or shave my head and wearing a monk's robe or look Vedic or Hindu, they don't really, people just, it's like, so it's hard for people now that know this stuff, because when I first knew this was 2008, when I knew the whole thing. And at that time, can you imagine in 2008 trying to tell the light worker community that they still have to do the work, the spiritual work, the techniques to attain meditation, when all these memes were telling them that the Galactic Federation of Light were going to show up with enlightenment beds. All you have to do is lay down in this sun-tanning bed and push one for moksha, and you were going to be enlightened. You don't have to do spiritual work. This is the type of stuff I was up against in 2008. I knew in time that these people would all be found out because their dates and the promises all failed. And people are starting to realize who these people are. And there's a lot of them out there. I know all of them. I've seen all of their little theories and their little presentations and stuff. And so there's a concerted effort, I think. And part of it's just shills. It's a lot of archon influence, dark influence behind it. They're trying to keep this information away from people for a reason, because they don't. An enlightened society raises consciousness. Golden age is guaranteed when we start lifting our consciousness because one enlightened person makes a big difference to everything. Even if you're not out actively teaching, you're just sitting there blissed out in your house, your energy is still feeding the Tao and feeding the energy of everything. And they don't want that. They don't want mass enlightenment. And I think this teaching is probably not a huge threat to them, because most people will read this, oh, that was really interesting, and then let's go right back reading other channeled stuff, and they won't do any proper practices, techniques. They might not even, I give this presentation, and then they want to know when the eclipse is. You can't go find out when the eclipse is. You can't even do that for yourself. There's still individual effort here. There's still, and these memes are just keep lifting people's spirits up and then dropping them and lifting them up. And that's really what's happened in the spiritual community for it's really been going on for 30 years. It needs to stop. And the only way to stop it is just don't give it energy anymore. Don't listen to these people that have been saying this stuff over and over and over, and all these dates have failed and stuff. It's the best thing you can do for this planet is lift your own consciousness, know the bliss, experience the bliss, live the bliss, and share it, and enjoy your life, and move on in your spiritual journey. That's what's happening now. We're in the ascending arc of Dwapara Yuga. We've really entered the stream of the golden age. We're not in this special band of space. We know where we're at in the Dwapara Yuga. Shri Tushwa is right. And I think a lot of this stuff has been lost and been suppressed by design. I really do. And it goes back a long ways. They've been trying to hide it for a long time. And I think that's why we only have fragments of the Kalachakra Tantra. And we got the Maha Yuga. Everything has been mixed up. And it's not just the effects of the Kali Yuga. There's the left-hand path, and that old interplay between the forces of light and dark. That's always at play. And you don't have to get brought down by it, because it's kind of a natural play too. As we step up in our vibration, as we're on this ascending arc now, I really think a lot of these dark forces and stuff, they won't even be here by the time we hit Treta Yuga. I think it'll all, it's the goal. Fortunately, the dark age is not that long. It's a period of roughly 2,400 years. And we're out of it now. So I think that, we really have to lift our individual consciousness now. Now's the time. And it's like you said, it's right there in front of us. It's right there in front of us. I've just shown you how much, and you can imagine for me actually watching an eclipse, and then, I knew right away that I'd have to try to explain this throughout all the religions and all of our past history. And it's a very difficult thing to kind of get it all into one comprehensive teaching, right, that everybody can understand. But I hope I did that. I hope that this does help people on their journey to higher consciousness.
Right. Now, and also, if people want to get in touch with you and kind of follow up, is there a way that they can?
Yeah, you can just leave my email on the links. I don't really mind, as long as it's somebody who really wants to ask a serious question or something. I've had a lot of responses where it's just people just kind of want to talk about themselves, and I can only help with higher teaching. That's kind of what I think my purpose was for incarnating here was probably more this than anything else I've accomplished in my life outside of this. But it's a hard thing to bring forward, especially in the crazy time the lightworker community was in the early 2008 time period. Everybody thought they knew what was happening based on all this channeling and stuff, and none of that stuff happened, and there was a reason for it, because it wasn't based on truth. It's not only the spiritual community has been hijacked by these fellas and this force, the exopolitical community has too. It's on both sides, and in my view, they all just merge. Really, this is exopolitics. Really, it's our history goes back, and there's connections with people flying between planets and bananas that can fly between planets and things like that. And it would be nice to see a more grounded exopolitical community, more grounded spiritual community. I think we're going to get there, because part of this consciousness rising is, I think the people watching this, they'll know at the soul level if this feels right, you know. And before we just fell for anything, we're quite gullible. It's kind of a nice thing about humans. We're pretty gullible. Somebody can spin the right thing, and oh, that sounds kind of nice, and off they go, right? It's kind of our weakness, but it's kind of a nice thing about humans as well. And I think that's been played on a lot in the past. But I think as we really did leave the Sandus period of Dwarpa Yuga, and we're full on in Dwarpa Yuga now, that you're going to see they're going to get more and more, and these young children that are incarnating now, they're not going to fall for this stuff at all. So these people who have been peddling this fluff for decades, they're really going to have to lift their game for this newer generation coming up, because I think that they're really the the sixth root race. The sun is changing. We're entering the Hopi fifth sun, and it's because of these two suns coming together. Light, the magnetics and the electrics change, and we're entering the time of the Hopi fifth sun, and we really are the sixth root. This is really the foundation for the next root race. We're in the next cycle. We're heading towards the golden age. It's all in place. We're just not quite in place yet. We're still got all of these control mechanisms and stuff. I believe it's all going to fall down in the coming years, though. We're going to see it fall down. It's still that. So it's not just all hopium. There's still some bumps along the way. But just don't get into those pockets of despair and stuff like that, because the most important thing you can do individually is attain enlightenment. And that's what Buddha taught, Krishna taught, Jesus taught. It still should be the underlying message. And when first contact happens or whatever, I really believe that's going to happen sometime when we're further on in Dwarpa Yuga, or maybe even Treta Yuga. I don't think it's 5-10 years away. I think it could be longer, because the higher worlds that we want to deal with, that we want to meet with, we can't be pointing nuclear warheads and having wars and all of this chaos still, like before they probably would even contact us. We'll probably hear from them a little as we tick up a bit further along the Yuga cycle. But nobody knows for sure. If we get our act together sooner, we'll see them sooner too. That's again why individual enlightenment is so important. It really is.
Well, thank you so much. This is just such a profound lesson and teaching, awareness, insight for all of us, and we're going to be able to bring this to all of our networks, and I know that the triad of lunar eclipses is going to be throughout 2018 and even to 2019. So perhaps we can rotate this, and perhaps during that time you can come back again and we can kind of refresh everybody and see what everybody's progress has been.
Absolutely. And I was even thinking that the best one is for North Americans, for us.
Yeah.
We get a little bit of the effects next week, but in the one in 2019 is South America, North America, full on total in the path of the total eclipse. Maybe that's a good time. Maybe I'll have like a little sit-in on my property where people can come. Good. We can actually do actual real techniques just before this one,
sure,
that one occurs. But for somebody watching this, when you know the technique and that the timing is so important, take note when these occur. They're going to occur for infinity, for the rest of history. Lunar eclipses and solar eclipses aren't going away. They're always there to aid us. That's how the multiverse works. So if you miss one, keep your practices, keep them going, try the next one. I would advise people just to go out in this one, even if you're not ready to do the final practice, just go out and watch it, sit down somewhere and watch it, and just imagine your consciousness sinking, and you'll actually feel the effects. You'll feel them. You will actually feel when this thing goes into totality, you'll feel it. So you'll just go out and feel it for yourself. This is not new age fluff or, spiritual hoopla. You will feel it. You will actually literally feel a pulling sensation on the top of your head,
right.
During a lunar eclipse. So go out and start your practices, and it's important not to get to that point of fear. It's not the end of the world. These triads, yeah, they fall on Jewish high holidays, but they follow a lunar calendar too. All of their holidays are during full moons and new moons. So the real thing, and it's like you said, it's right in front of our eyes. Everybody's looking for doom and gloom on these triads, and they're there for another reason. We just left. We're into full-on Dwarpa Yuga, and we get this unprecedented tetrad right after, and a triad right after that. Use your think with your soul, and your answers will come to you. That there is a connection here. I know there's a connection.
I love that phrase you just said, think with your soul.
Yeah.
And well, thank you so much. These shows and especially this one has been such a treasure that you've left with our audience and with our community here. And so we're going to make it especially so that it's visible during this time, and we'll make sure that it's very visible during the time of this lunar eclipse and the coming lunar eclipses, and so that any other further things that you want to bring to it, but we're certainly going to be making this very, very visible at this time. So thank you very much.
Thanks for doing that. And if this at the soul level really sits well with viewers, if you could forward it on to friends, other people on the path, anybody you know who's spiritually inclined. I don't have a website. I don't really push this very hard. I probably should, but it's not my nature to do that. I'm kind of low key. I kind of trust the multiverse too. I think when it's ready, this will get out. But help a little bit, because the more eyes that see this right now, I think it's important. I think more people need to see this, and if other people can help with that, that would be great, because you're the only avenue I really have so far for getting this information out. I've had other people want to do interviews, but I've been busy and kind of held back on that, because it takes a lot of effort too to do these teachings, and at least we got this down. It's not a 5-part series this time, but there's a lot of information to try to impart. So I hope I did a good job on this one, that somebody could come and just watch this one and get the gist of what they need to do to change their own consciousness.
Well, thank you. Is there any other point that you had wanted to bring up that perhaps you didn't get a chance to, or?
No, not really. Other than I still think for some people it's still important for some to find a guru, to find somebody who can help them through some of this stuff. Some people still need that, and they're hard to find too. There's lots of teachers in the world, but there's not a lot of gurus. Those are the type of people who actually transform you. A teacher can just teach you something that you don't already know, but a guru really transforms you. And unfortunately, a lot of those people still are in India, because you have to have a complete teaching. You can be one of these accidentals that just woke up enlightened one day, but you don't know all of this, or you don't have a complete teaching yet. And So that they might not be the best person to seek out some of these new age books and stuff that are available. They're not complete teachings. You really need a complete teaching. And so when you study Vajra, a lot of the Tibetan sects are the best to go for that. And if you study Kriya Yoga, make sure it's the link to Babaji, Lahari Mahasaya, Shri Yukteswar, Yogananda, that lineage, Amanda May, Gurnath, that whole lineage is filled with enlightened masters. And so if you realize your initial meditation might have been Vipassana or any other types of meditation, they're good to help slow the mind down, but you're now at the point where you want to take these final steps and you need to know something like Kriya Yoga, where you can really learn to move that Buddha nature life force. That lineage is probably one of the best of all of them. Buddhism, everything, that lineage, they've nailed it. When it comes to the technique, those guys have probably got one of the best ones. And that's why I plug it, because I'm advanced far enough to know that which one's the best one and which ones aren't. And I hope I've been able to lead people to understand why that technique is so important. Our ancients knew it too. So it goes back a long ways. This is not New Age. This is old. This is thousands and thousands of years older than Christianity. Thousands of years older than Hinduism. Even it's thousands of years older than Judaism. This is old. This is ancient stuff. This is before religions. This stuff goes before. Galepi Tepe is before religions, basically. Galepi Tepe. That site's 12,000 years old. That's before most our religions, modern religions, were even created. This is old. This is not New Age. This is old age. You were just given some old age stuff, not New Age stuff. Even though the New Age labels throwing on all this kind of stuff, this is not New Age. This is old age, and the Kalachakra is 2,500 years old as well. So it's been known for a long time. We just lost it, but it's not lost anymore. So there's no excuses.
Right, good. And so now it's up to us to really incorporate it into our own lives and begin to, as we can, share it and let it grow.
Yeah, and practice it and enjoy the fruit of your labors, like it's bliss, perpetual bliss. That's the carrot. That's my hopium. Close with that. Perpetual bliss.
Perpetual bliss. Good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you again, Alfred.
Good enough.
Have a good night.
Thank you.